I wish I could describe in a fancy or unique manner how I found out my wife was cheating on me, but I can't. It happened just like a cliché from a poorly written story. I work at an auto parts factory, specifically making brakes. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I spend 8 hours a day from 4 to midnight, 5 days a week, operating an ancient machine. I'm decked out in safety gear, eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed shoes, and a denim apron. I meet my daily quota, and if I'm lucky, I might get a bonus at year-end. I have a cozy 3-bedroom house, a lovely wife, and 2 sons in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, things seem stable. Until today. We have 5 stations assembling the brake shoes, all powered by compressed air. In the 8 years I've been here, we've had no issues with the equipment. However, today, halfway through the shift, the compressed air system malfunctioned. The air needs to be completely dry to function properly, filtered and dehydrated by automatic equipment. But today, it failed. The dehydrator system didn't expel the collected moisture as it should have. I'm no expert, but I know when moisture mixes with high-pressure air, everything freezes, and work comes to a standstill. Instead of waiting around, they sent us all home without pay, naturally. It's ironic, my whole life disrupted by high humidity. Upon entering the bedroom, I observed a scene where a hairy back was moving on top of my wife, Marcy. Naturally, I turned on the overhead light, realizing that Marcy wasn't asleep. She expressed annoyance at my presence, asking what I was doing there. I anticipated fear, apology, or shame from her, but instead she seemed angry. I inquired about her anger, to which she responded by accusing me of knowing exactly what was happening. She expressed regret that I had to witness the situation, but blamed me for not coming home on time. According to her, if I had been on time, the other person wouldn't have been there, and she wouldn't have been caught. The guy, previously obscured by the bed, now turned to glare at me with a smirk. Marcy half-heartedly pulled the covers up for modesty. My mistake was grabbing him as he got off the bed. He seemed much larger standing than lying down. For my trouble, I received 2 incredibly hard blows to the ribs. I never managed to land a punch. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, struggling to breathe. I think I got drub on the side of my head, and that's the last thing I remember. I woke up in the hospital emergency room, my ribs being bandaged by a medical technician. Marcy sat nearby, looking disgusted. The technician finished up and left the room. "Marcy, who was that guy? And why was he in our house?" "His name's Tony. He's a friend, and I invited him over." "You were with him? You were with him in our bed? Our kids were sleeping down the hall." "Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made a scene, they wouldn't have woken up. I had to get my sister to watch them so I could bring you here." "What was he doing here? How many times are you going to ask?" "Tony and I have been seeing each other for about 6 months. We were trying to keep it from you. We don't usually come here, but I couldn't find a sitter." "Is it over now?" "No, it's not. Danny, you're a good dad and husband, but Tony's great in bed. I don't see why we should end it just because you found out. But I promise we won't meet here anymore. It's not fair to you or the kids." "I'm sorry, Marcy. That's not okay. It ends now." "Danny, if you try to interfere with my relationship with Tony, you'll regret it. He smack you easily and he'll do it again. If you do anything, everyone will know you're a loser. Our friends, family, even your coworkers. Your life will be a nightmare. Don't you care what anyone thinks? You'd stoop that low just to hurt me?" "If I have to, but I doubt you'll risk it. Tony thinks you're a loser, and I agree. You'll have to live with it, Danny boy." "Who is he anyway? Where does he work?" "He doesn't work. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car place on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to visit but never did. He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you. He's also stronger and better with his fists." "Why not marry him if he's so great?" "That's why I keep you, darling. Tony doesn't want kids, and I won't give mine up. You'll play house while he gets the love. You either accept it or everyone will know what a loser you are. And by the way, I'm moving your stuff to the guest room. No need to share a bed now that it's out there." "Who watched the kids when you were with Tony?" "Usually Karen, sometimes your parents. Speaking of which, Karen introduced me to Tony. I'll thank her later." They discharged me the following morning. Marcy wasn't around. I debated calling someone or taking a taxi. The taxi won. With the kids at school and Marcy absent from home, all my clothes and personal belongings were stacked on the guest bed. I anticipated Todd and Terry might have questions about the situation, but I decided to let Marcy handle it. Setting up my new living space took less than an hour. Various thoughts raced through my mind. However, there was no way I was going to let things unfold as Marcy intended. My first move was retrieving my old phone recorder from the basement. Although it only functioned with the landline, it was my only option. Marcy primarily used her cell phone for calls. Setting it up and concealing it behind some old paint cans took about 20 minutes. It was a starting point. Feeling terrible, I still mustered up enough to return to work. They offered me pain pills, but I hesitated to take them and then operate machinery. Opting for a couple of heavy-duty Tylenols instead seemed like the better choice. Marcy had seriously misjudged my relationship with my coworkers. I divulged everything that occurred the previous evening to them. They all brainstormed ideas, some better than others. It was reassuring to know my friends had my back. With an 8-hour shift ahead, each of us planned to devise ways to set things right. During our mid-shift break for supper, Glenn spoke up first. "Any ideas?" "I don't have one, but I have a cousin who works for DeMarco. He does vehicle detailing and despises him. He could provide intel on the business, buildings, or work shifts," Glenn shared. "That would be helpful, Glenn. Anyone else?" "Danny?" Barry offered. "I have 2 muskets and 2 pistols. You're welcome to any of them. None are registered, so there's no concern there." "Thanks, Barry, but that's a bit more extreme than I was considering." "Don't even want to hear my idea," Freddie interjected, followed by some laughter. "Tell us, Freddie, come on," the group urged. "I thought we could tie him to a tree, legs spread, and build a bonfire Indian-style between his legs." Although Freddie's idea was well received, it was unanimously rejected. Kyle, who hadn't shared yet, faced everyone's expectant gazes during lunch. "What? Don't give me that look." "Yeah, I've got an idea, but it's a bit out there." "Go on, Kyle." "I recall reading about a prison in Arizona that dressed love-making offenders in pink jumpsuits to humiliate them. I know Tony isn't a love offender, but something like that could embarrass him." "You mean put him in a pink jumpsuit? Wouldn't he just take it off?" "I was thinking if we could get to him, tie him up, and then spray paint him entirely with pink. That might do the trick, but he'd know who did it." "You've got to knock him out first, then leave him tied to the chair until he's discovered. Do we use medications or just punch him? What's your plan?" "I can grab a taser. All you have to do is sneak up and shock him. You're making it sound easier than it probably is. How do we catch him alone? And how do we approach without him noticing?" "I don't have all the answers. Just thought it was an idea." The buzzer signaled another 4 hours on the machines. My quota was down, so the other guys pitched in to help. Marcy was already in bed when I arrived home, keeping her promise not to bring him into the house. I had no clue what to do. Most of the ideas with the guys were like high school pranks. Might as well leave a flaming bag of dog poop on his doorstep. I needed genuine revenge. At noon, I got up. With the kids at school and Marcy moving around, I showered, shaved, and headed out. "Morning, husband. No kiss?" She smirked by the sink. Ignoring her, I left. Her comment didn't warrant a response. I needed lunch and alone time. The afternoon was spent killing time, figuring out how to get back at my wife's lover without causing trouble. Work awaited, and I needed to prepare. I decided to stop eating at home, the only time with the boys, but I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking. Before I knew it, it was time for work. Things were normal until supper break when Carl announced proudly that he had a taser in the car for self-protection. He reminded Danny not to forget to pick it up and asked if Danny had ever used it. Danny replied that he hadn't, but they could try it out, eliciting groans from the others at the table. Despite the lack of new ideas, they all showed support for Danny, which made him feel better knowing he had friends. At home, the routine was ordinary, although working the graveyard shift had disrupted sleep patterns. Todd and Terry, up earlier than usual, suggested going to Chuck E. Cheese, which Marcy didn't mind since they'd be out all day. Marcy informed Danny that he would need to take a few vacation days as Tony's friend Wally would be visiting from Detroit next week, and they planned to go on a cruise to Cancun. She suggested that if Danny couldn't take the time off, he should ask his parents. Danny expressed skepticism about Marcy's plans, questioning her intention to go on a sea cruise with 2 guys. Marcy defended herself, saying it wasn't as questionable as Danny implied, and explained that Wally would be sharing a room with Karen, who had been friends with him for years. Danny responded sarcastically, acknowledging that it seemed dandy. He made a mental note to thank Karen later. Despite being up early, it seemed like it would be a long day. To pass time before Chuck E. Cheese opened, we visited the nearby Hobby Lobby. The boys were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models there. The end results weren't impressive, but they had a blast. I let them explore while I marveled at the crafts available for creative homemakers. If Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy gorilla. Too late now. I was thrilled to find rows of designer paint and spray cans. There they were, 6 beautiful pink cans. They didn't hold as much as the ones at Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink. It was the only place I'd seen paint that color in a spray can. I took it as a sign and bought all 6. Todd chose a monster truck kit, and Terry picked a tugboat. Plastic tugboat models were news to me. Before leaving, I grabbed a package of 10 large plastic cable wraps about 18 inches long. They looked sturdy enough. Chuck E. Cheese was ready by then. The kids spent about 4 hours and 2 pizzas there before they got tired. We fed ducks in the park with cheap bread before heading to my parents' house. They were glad to have us for supper in the evening. Todd and Terry watched TV most of the night, while I briefed Dad on the situation with Marcy. I realized I was telling people about it before Marcy could. Her threat seemed less significant. Dad promised to take care of the boys, which eased my mind. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to say we'd be staying at my parents' house. Got the machine. After a big breakfast at IHOP, we found Marcy still in bed. I started mowing the lawn while the boys worked on their models. Even though it was a beautiful day outside, I let them go. I decided to make a full day of the lawn work, including edging and pruning. Things didn't go as fast as usual because I found myself chatting a lot. I had hedge clippers but borrowed a set from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, loved gossip. I warned Mike about unfamiliar cars at our house because Marcy would entertain male friends. If they got rowdy, he should call the police. It was hard for me to manage things since I work nights. Larry Finley, from the local church board, lent me a spark plug wrench. I apologized for Marcy's recent behavior. Of course, he was curious about what I meant. Larry was even more of a gossip than Mary Fielding. In just 10 minutes, he had enough gossip to last a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I headed to Rosie's Cantina and treated myself to the priciest dish on the menu. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was delicious. I spent the evening with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already filled him in on the situation. I crashed on his couch for the night. My wife had a grand scheme. She intended to coerce me into compliance by threatening to expose me as a betrayed man. If I didn't endorse and back her infidelity, she'd make my life hell. It was an intriguing plan, but it had many flaws. In less than a week, I'd already spilled the beans to everyone. That pretty much nullified her threat. I also managed to portray her as a cheap tramp more effectively than she could have imagined. I don't think she foresaw any backlash. The next afternoon, when I stopped by the house to change for work, Marcy was waiting for me, visibly upset. She mentioned that Karen had informed her about rumors circulating among the neighbors that she was running a brothel at night. I reassured her that I had simply told the neighbors that she might have male visitors while I was at work and advised them not to be concerned about it. However, Marcy insisted that the rumors were spreading differently and asked who else I had spoken to. I admitted that I had spoken to everyone, thinking it would be easier that way. I hadn't mentioned anything to her parents or sisters and suggested she handle that before they heard the rumors. Marcy expressed frustration, feeling like the rumors were making her look bad. In response, I pointed out that the situation wasn't fair to me either, as it made me appear like a betrayed man. Marcy apologized but said she had to leave for work. She mentioned that she had managed to spend some time with the boys before leaving, though it wasn't the quality time she had hoped for. Glenn had some great news that night. Continental Classics shut down at 9 o'clock on Thursday night, so Tony could personally handle all the paychecks for Friday. He hated being disturbed while doing payroll, so even the cleaning crew was gone. Kyle took a few minutes to show me how to use the taser. No one volunteered to test it. The plan was falling into place. If I got caught, and I fully expected to, I'd likely face jail time. I didn't care. Tony DeMarco needed to be humiliated. If I got arrested, I'd ensure all newspapers and TV stations got the full story. Any publicity like that would crush him, or at least infuriate him enough to make a mistake. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten a meal at home since that first day. Finally, Thursday arrived. I arranged for my truck to have a dead battery, so Kyle picked me up. The floor supervisor rarely bothered the brake guys too much. As long as we met our quotas and maintained quality, they left us alone. The OSHA requirements for the job would work in my favor. With our apron gloves and welding goggles, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys would take turns covering for me at my station. One of their posts would be empty, but no one really cared. Toilet breaks were normal and unregulated. The main thing was to create the illusion that I never left. I entered the staff entrance at Continental Classics and headed directly to the restroom. Around 9 o'clock, someone quickly checked the area before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I donned latex gloves and exited the restroom into a dimly lit office area. Tony's desk overlooked the showroom, so his back was turned to the door. It seemed easier than I had anticipated. Despite having a computer in front of him, he was using an old adding machine with paper tape. He didn't hear my approach. I zapped Tony with the taser on the back of his neck. His body idioted upright, and fearing he might turn around, I administered another shock. This time he twitched a bit before relaxing. Perfect. I secured 2 plastic cable wraps on each limb and brought along an old necktie to use as a blindfold. He cooperated without resistance. I rolled his chair to the showroom window. He would be perfectly visible when his staff arrived for work in the morning. The paint, a pretty pink color, required more coats than expected. It was absorbed into his clothing quickly, necessitating at least 3 coats in each area to achieve the desired effect. I just had enough paint, but barely. He looked quite striking in pink. After completing the task, I carefully packed everything back up. I had anticipated Tony waking up during the process, but he remained still. I had also planned to remove the necktie blindfold before leaving. I checked my watch several times, well within the time frame I had set, but I still wanted Tony awake before I left. 5 minutes later, I started to worry. I attempted to feel for a pulse without success. Perhaps the latex gloves hindered my sensitivity. I removed one glove and tried again, but still no pulse. Trying to find a pulse on his neck like on TV yielded nothing. I removed the blindfold and touched his eyeball with a pencil tip. No blink, no reflex. Needless to say, panic set in. I regained my composure, put the latex glove back on, and wiped everything I might have touched. I pocketed the necktie and cut off all the plastic ties. Removing them revealed marks from the pink paint, which looked odd. The white skin under the necktie made him resemble a pink raccoon. After ensuring I didn't overlook anything, I left for work. On the way back to the shop, I disposed of all items, including the taser, in a storm sewer. 10 minutes later, I was back at work making brake shoes. No one noticed my absence. After the shift ended, I informed the guys of what happened. They were all accessories, so I was confident nobody would speak up. Freddie was impressed, and none of them seemed concerned. Kyle drove me home, and we both noted the time of his drop-off. I didn't manage to sleep as long as usual. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What on earth did you do? What did you do, you little idiot?" Naturally, I just rolled over and gave her a puzzled look. "What in the world are you talking about, woman? Tony's dead. Karen called and said they found him in his office this morning. Dead. I suspect you had something to do with it. And I'll make sure you pay, you idiot." That was the second time she called me an idiot in 5 minutes. It was pretty clear I wouldn't be getting any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and went to the bathroom. Not eager to face Marcy's wrath, I took a long, hot shower and shaved slowly. I even put on a bit of aftershave just to annoy my dear wife. I never made it to the coffee pot. A tall man stood in the living room conversing with Marcy. His hair was closely cropped and he wore a dark suit. The witch had called the cops, no doubt about it. I shook my head and headed into the kitchen for my first cup of the day. Marcy wore a sarcastic smirk as I settled into my favorite recliner. My uninvited guest followed suit. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green with an E. I'm here regarding the pass-away of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife mentioned you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Sure, no objections, but not here." "What do you mean? If you want to talk, let's do it in your office, not in my home. Is that okay with you?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was pretty sure she had expected to be part of the conversation. "Your car or mine, Mr. Mercer?" "I have a few other things to attend to, so I'll meet you there." "Any particular office?" "Second floor, rear room 206. Just turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you shortly." Marcy was seething as I put on my shoes. I never got around to finishing the coffee, so I dumped it in the sink. I turned and smiled as I walked out the door. "I guess you'll get what you wanted, sweetheart." "What are you talking about? What do you mean, Danny?" 10 minutes later, I was seated with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green asked all the pertinent questions, and I provided suitable answers. He delicately broached the topic of the affair without dwelling on it or being overly blunt. Naturally, I had to acknowledge having a motive, but I insisted I never had the opportunity to act on it. It was a serious matter, but I endeavored to be cooperative without being cheeky. I think he appreciated my efforts to make his job easier, even though I couldn't provide a definitive answer. The most intriguing part of the conversation was learning that Tony passed away due to a heart issue. He had a pacemaker put in a couple of years back, which apparently didn't mesh well with the taser. They deduced the taser's involvement from the marks on his neck. I felt remorseful about Tony's pass away, yet there was also a sense of relief. Detective Green gave me the customary "don't leave town" spiel and mentioned he'd contact me after confirming my alibi. It was unexpected. I never imagined needing an alibi for anything. It was kind of thrilling. We parted on good terms, and I sensed that Darnell Green was supportive, which was comforting. After grabbing a quick meal, I tuned into the TV news. There was a segment about the demise of a local businessman, noting he had no relatives in the area. I withdrew funds from the bank accounts and then treated myself to a nice breakfast. There were tasks to attend to at home. Marcy wasn't around when I returned. It took me half an hour to relocate all my belongings to the master bedroom and hers to the guest room. The guest room had limited storage space, so I piled her things on the bed for her to organize. I checked the telephone recorder in the basement, finding nothing noteworthy. I gathered banking, insurance records, and other vital documents. Thankfully, Marcy's Volvo was in my name, simplifying matters. I stashed everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I phoned work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my beloved wife arrived. She seemed taken aback to find me at home. It was time to set things straight again. I grinned as I escorted her to the guest room. "What's this? Who do you think you are?" Her response was a smirk. "Tell me, damn it, what's happening, Marcy?" "I'll be using the master bedroom from now on. You can have the guest room. I suggest you start putting away your clothes. Anything left out by dinner will be disposed of. Any questions?" "I can't fit my stuff in that tiny closet, and I won't stay in that room anyway. What do you mean, disposed of?" "If it doesn't fit in the closet or dresser, you don't need it. This is non-negotiable. Danny, you're in trouble. Get your act together. If you need clarification, ask later." Idiot. That was the 3rd time that day she called me an idiot. I must be making some progress. While Marcy was occupied in the guest room, I emptied her purse on the kitchen table. I meticulously collected what I wanted. First, I took her cell phone and car keys. From her wallet, I removed her driver's license, credit cards, debit cards, and cash. I replaced the remaining items. I retrieved her car title from the pickup and drove her Volvo to a friend who owned a car lot across town. I sold it to him outright at a fair price, with the understanding he'd sell it wholesale out of town. Even after settling the loan, I pocketed a few $1,000s. As I headed into Taco Bell for lunch, my cell phone rang. "You witch! Where's my cell phone and where's my car?" I was relieved she didn't call me in schmirk this time. She was calling from the house phone. It was a good test. I could check the recorder later. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get money to hire a lawyer for the homicide charges. I promise to get you another car once I'm out of jail," I said, ending the call and turning off the cell phone. After that conversation, I realized getting a lawyer was crucial. No matter what happened, I was determined not to stay married. But I had to wait. I was next in line to order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I went straight to my sons, ignoring Marcy. I did glance her way a few times and noticed she wasn't happy. The boys eagerly showed me their models. When Marcy began preparing dinner, I wandered to the guest room. My clothes were back on the bed, Marcy's in the master bedroom. I chuckled, but chose not to argue. She seemed stubborn and resolute. Marcy instructed the boys to wash up for dinner, and I returned to the guest room to unpack. I would have loved to discard her belongings, but that seemed too immature. Red Lobster was my treat tonight. Money wasn't an issue. I still had cash after the lawyer's deposit. The shrimp and lobster combo was delicious, but the cheese rolls remained my favorite. After finishing, I switched on my cell phone, hoping for a call from work or Detective Green. The first call I received was from my wife, who asked how she could go to the grocery store to pick up some items, including milk. I assured her that I would take her when I returned, and suggested planning our shopping trips for Saturdays when I was off work. I expressed a preference for her not to go alone and mentioned another call coming in, prompting me to end our conversation with plans to talk later. The second call was from Kyle, who informed me that Detective Green had spoken to the entire crew individually and as a group, and everyone's stories had checked out. He mentioned that Tom Tingle, the floor manager, had strongly supported him, emphasizing that Kyle couldn't have missed work. After arriving home just in time to tuck the boys in, I found Marcy sitting on the couch with wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's and settled into my recliner, hoping to initiate a conversation. I asked Marcy about her plan to paint me as a villain, which abruptly ended the conversation. Marcy finished her wine, left for her bedroom, and I realized she didn't actually want to talk. Disappointed, I grabbed my beer and checked the recorder. The first call was to her sister, no cover-up there. It seemed Marge knew about the affair with Tony and supported Marcy. That was reassuring. The next call to Marcy's mom was different. Mom was clueless. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's, and I was jealous because I'd been pursuing Karen for years. Although she didn't directly accuse me of homicide, it was heavily implied. She contacted the cell phone company to inquire about a replacement for the phone I took but had no luck. Then, she reached out to the DMV to report the loss of her driver's license, and they advised her to inform the police. When she called the bank to request a new credit card, she discovered the account was closed. I'll give her this, she was quite active. The final call on the machine was to Karen. Even though Karen lived nearby, they opted for a phone call instead of meeting in person. It worked out in my favor, of course. From that call, I gleaned two important details. Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Marcy planned to keep a low profile until his arrival. The next day, the boys and I were up early and out of the house before Marcy woke up. We returned home after lunch, and Marcy insisted I drive her to the grocery store since she lacked a car and driver's license. That evening, while she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and immediately called Marcy. Their conversation was intriguing. He believed Marcy's story and vowed revenge. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, and he was adamant about seeking justice. He provided Marcy with his contact information and instructed her to call him the following day. Afterward, Marcy excitedly phoned Karen, expressing her happiness. It was hard to believe this was the same woman I'd been married to for years. The transformation was sudden and complete. I never imagined my actions, aside from confronting her lover, warranted such a drastic change. Before turning in, I grabbed a burger. Knowing the lawn needed mowing again, I used it as an excuse to avoid Marcy the next day. Around 11 o'clock, Marcy's parents arrived to pick up the boys for an unplanned sleepover. But I didn't object. Grandma Wilcox assured they'd be back in time for school tomorrow. Eager to check the phone recorder, I postponed until after lunch since I skipped breakfast. Following a quick shower, I headed to Denny's. Marcy made no mention of my absence from home. She and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's pass away, which seemed somewhat absurd to me given my knowledge of the situation. Their plan involved Wally entering the house through the back deck's sliding door while Marcy assured him it would be unlocked if all went well. It was meant to appear as a burglary gone wrong, with me being shot. Both Marcy and Karen were to call emergency upon hearing the gunshot. At that moment, I realized I hadn't updated my insurance policy beneficiaries. As I left, I sarcastically blew a kiss to my wife, receiving a finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and stayed the evening. Before leaving, I borrowed Dad's snake charmer, a short-barreled 20-gauge, for the upcoming event. Marcy was in bed when I returned home, her light on, presumably reading. The lone message on the answering machine came from Karen, boasting about her and Wally's pleasurable afternoon. Before signing off, she assured Marcy of her readiness later that night. It took me roughly 20 minutes to swap out the buckshot in the shells with rock salt using a leftover bag from last winter. My intention wasn't to eliminate Wally, but merely to slow him down. Honestly, I didn't wish damage upon Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have a bad heart like Tony did. Wanting to check the back deck door, I hesitated, fearing Wally might spot me. I had to assume Marcy left it unlocked. I stripped down to my shorts and mussed up the bed blankets. A cup of coffee would have been preferable, but since none was available, I settled for a drink, waiting in my recliner with the cell phone close by. He didn't arrive until after midnight. Upon spotting him on the deck, I promptly dialed emergency, reporting an intruder in my house and expressing fear for my life, keeping the line open. The patio door slid open quietly, revealing Wally. I waited until he was fully inside the house before delivering the first blast. I aimed for his lower body to avoid accidental pass away. The first shot knocked him back under the deck. With the second shot, he tumbled over the deck's side, breaking the railing. I knew I hadn't eliminated him as he howled in pain. Man, that rock salt must have caused quite the sting. I was amazed at how deafening the musket blast sounded indoors. My ears were ringing intensely. When I flipped on the lights, Marcy was already in the living room screaming. Although she was shouting at me, her words were unintelligible. I approached to check on Wally and noticed a Ruger .22 automatic pistol with a silencer on the floor. Marcy continued to scream, so I aimed the musket in her direction, causing her to quickly quiet down and flee the room. It appeared Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Some guys seemed to have all the luck. 10 minutes later, the first police car arrived. There wasn't much discussion. I placed the musket on the floor to avoid any confusion about the situation. Pointing to the phone, I informed the officers that everything was under control. When asked about other occupants, I mentioned Marcy in the bedroom. Bringing her into the living room, the officers realized their mistake. Despite their attempts to quiet her, both Marcy and I were unsuccessful. Finally, a large female officer gently escorted her outside. I noticed Karen standing with some neighbors outside. I grinned at her and gestured across my throat, but she quickly walked away without reciprocating. The EMTs arrived for Wally as Detective Green showed up. He smiled at me, and I couldn't help but grin back. It wasn't intentional sass, but I couldn't resist. The female officer escorted Marcy back inside so she could dress. After getting dressed, we all headed to the police headquarters. I requested separate cars, and Detective Green agreed to let me ride with him. We didn't speak on the way downtown, but he smiled at me again. It was daylight when Green released me. Although we only spoke for about 30 minutes, they kept me at the station all night, making me drink coffee. One of the police cars drove me home. I was disappointed not to see yellow tape around the house. Everything looked normal, and even the rock salt hadn't damaged the glass door. Wally seemed to have borne the brunt of it. I estimated it would take about an hour to fix the broken railing. I went to bed and didn't wake up until after lunch. After relieving myself, I stumbled into the kitchen to find my amiable detective seated at the table, engrossed in the newspaper and sipping fresh coffee, which I presumed he brewed while I slept. Having had my fill of coffee the night before, I opted for a tall glass of orange juice and settled across from him. How he entered the house eluded me. "You're quite the chill guy, Mr. Mercer," he remarked, his eyes fixed on the paper. Uncertain how to reply, I remained silent, unsure if he was toying with me. Finishing his coffee, he finally spoke. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and some lunch. I'll treat, unless it violates some police protocol." "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day." Heading to the shower, I pondered when he found time to sleep. Lunch comprised 2 hefty pulled pork sandwiches, and Green even joined me in washing them down with a beer. As the silence grew palpable, he broke it. "You were itching to ask me questions, weren't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Funny, I had the same thought about you," I retorted. Green flagged down the waiter for 2 more drafts. "I spent the whole night grilling you. Now it's your turn." "All right, first off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. Charges will be filed this afternoon." Downing my beer, I processed the unexpected news. I had a flood of inquiries, but delving deeper risked exposing myself. Opting to retreat, I remarked, "Nice to see Marcy's folks rallying for her." "As I won't be." "No more questions, Detective Green. But if you need to spill, go ahead." He chuckled, taking a swig. "One more thing. Did you happen to overhear or record any conversations between your wife and Mr. Williams?" "You mean Wally?" That earned me a smirk. "If I did have such a recording, would you want it?" "I'm unsure. If things unfold as I anticipate, it may not matter. But if they get skilled lawyers, having such evidence could be troublesome, right?" "You're onto something. I'm just trying to streamline my job. I'll manage without a hypothetical tape." I nodded slightly. "Thanks, Danny boy. I think I should drive you home. Your boys will return from school soon, needing their father." We reached the house just as Todd and Terry disembarked from the school bus. They approached us, and I introduced them to my new detective companion. Eager to see his badge, they expressed interest. However, the mood shifted when Green inquired, "So, who built the tugboat and who assembled the monster truck?" "I built the truck!" Todd exclaimed proudly, while Terry declared, "I did the tugboat. Want to see it?" With a promise of possibly inspecting them another time, Terry departed, leaving me stunned as he walked to his car with a satisfied grin. He knew about the pink paint predicament, holding the upper hand. Helpless, we ordered pizza for dinner, and the boys didn't inquire about their mom's whereabouts. After supper, Marcy's dad called, seeking assistance to raise bail money for her release from jail. Politely declining, I wondered if he truly comprehended the situation, but at least he tried to be a supportive father. Inquiring about her accommodation, he hesitated before stating she would stay with them. We assisted in loading Marcy's belongings into the pickup and dropped them off without issue. Returning home, I noticed a U-Haul truck in Karen's driveway, vanished the next morning. Marcy never reached out, leaving me to glean updates from the daily newspaper. I felt deliberately excluded from the unfolding events. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all blame on Wally, who countered it was her idea. Both accepted pleas, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally receiving 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities were consulted regarding Wally's silencer, but postponed action until he completed his initial sentence. Detective Green didn't require the tape and ceased mentioning it. Karen disappeared without a trace. My dad reclaimed his musket, jesting that I might need it again. Chuckling, he mentioned Marcy served me with divorce papers. Once her jail term began, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents as I couldn't balance work and caring for the boys alone. My colleagues welcomed me back, and although offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison. During these visits, I remained in the car, typically less than an hour, sometimes outdoors in good weather, observing them through the chain-link fence. I refrained from discussing the visits with them and requested they not share any details. It seemed to suit all of us well, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes." "I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested I reach out to you. There are matters we need to discuss." "I'm aware. But why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, damn. Just when I thought I'd put all this behind me. Now this." "I understand, but I don't think avoiding this conversation is wise. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if we could meet. There are things I need to address. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where should we meet?" "I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable is fine." It took me a moment to respond. "Let's meet Saturday at 10 o'clock at the showroom. I'll bring my sons. They enjoy old cars." Unsure of her intentions, I felt safer in public with the boys. I didn't want to use them as a shield, but I believed she'd be less inclined to cause trouble with them present. I speculated about her potential grudge, assuming she might be Italian and hot-blooded. Eventually, I concluded I was overthinking and needed a beer. I called Detective Green for insight. He chuckled, advising me to meet with her and stop fretting. Easy for him to say, as he wasn't the one who eliminated her brother. Continental Classics was an expansive and impressive establishment. Apart from the main showroom, they possessed 2 sizable buildings in the rear, housing cars awaiting restoration or awaiting display on the showroom floor. It came as a shock when we arrived to find them hosting a grand opening celebration. I hadn't anticipated it. There were many aspects of the event that puzzled me. Terry and Todd appeared torn between the cars and the complimentary items. My first impression was the scent emanating from the popcorn machine. A man clad in floppy shoes and a rubber nose distributed small bags of freshly popped kernels, while adjacent stood a soda machine and another clown manning a hot dog cart. It seemed the boys wouldn't require lunch today. Angela Hawkins wasn't difficult to identify. The moment I observed her striding purposefully towards me, I recognized her immediately. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage: dark hair, eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. While a gentleman might not have noticed the latter, they were accentuated by her stature, barely reaching 5 feet. Tony was colossal, whereas his sister was short and stout. I felt a twinge of anxiety as she approached, then noticed the miniature version of her by her side, a young girl of about 10, bearing a striking resemblance to Angela, albeit with lighter hair and naturally lacking any hips at all. It appeared my hostess employed the same tactic as I did for security, as we both relied on our children. As she closed the distance between us, her hand extended in a friendly gesture. "Daniel Mercer, I presume?" It felt only natural and polite to shake her hand, reminiscent of a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingston. Though she wore a smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which eased my own apprehension. I stood there silently, prompting her to continue speaking. It felt as though I were deliberately being excluded from the loop. There was no trial. Marcy pinned all the blame on Wally, who in turn claimed it was her idea. Both eventually pleaded guilty, with Marcy receiving 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit homicide, and Wally 5 to 10 years for attempted homicide. Federal authorities became involved due to the silencer Wally possessed, opting to await the completion of his initial sentence before taking further action. Detective Green never revisited the issue of the tape. Karen disappeared without a trace. My father was pleased to retrieve his musket and joked that I could borrow it again if needed. He chuckled as he said so. Marcy served with divorce papers. Upon commencing her jail term, she didn't contest anything. I sensed she wanted nothing to do with me since I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. Selling the house, I returned to live with my parents as I couldn't juggle work and childcare alone. My co-workers welcomed me back, and though offered a switch to the day shift, I declined. I regularly took the boys to visit their mother at Muncie Women's Prison, waiting in the car during their brief meetings, sometimes outdoors in good weather. I refrained from questioning them about the visits, asking them not to divulge anything. This arrangement seemed to suit us all well, and everything appeared to be running smoothly until I received the phone call. "Hello? Is this Daniel Mercer?" "Yes. I'm Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green recommended I call you. There are things we need to discuss." "I understand, Detective Green. But why do you want to talk to me?" "Tony DeMarco was my brother." "Oh, darn. Just when I thought all this was over. Why does this have to happen?" "I don't think that's a wise idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't assist you." I ended the call before she could say more. 2 days later, she called again. "Daniel, I'd appreciate it if you could meet me. There are some things I need to say. Detective Green mentioned you're reasonable. Where would you like to meet?"
"I'd prefer the auto showroom, but anywhere you're comfortable works."
It took me a moment to decide.
"I'll meet you Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the showroom.
I'll bring my 2 sons. They enjoy looking at old cars." I didn't know her intentions, but felt safer in public with my boys. I wasn't using them as a shield, but hoped she'd be less likely to do anything. I realized I was overthinking. I needed a beer. I called Detective Green, who laughed and advised me to meet with her and stop worrying. Easy for him, he didn't eliminate her brother. Continental Classics was an impressive place with a main showroom and 2 large buildings at the back for cars needing restoration or display. I was surprised to find they were having a grand opening celebration. There were many things I didn't understand. Terry and Todd seemed torn between the cars and the freebies. The first thing that caught my attention was the smell of the popcorn machine. A person with floppy shoes and a rubber nose was handing out small bags of hot popped kernels. Nearby, there was a soda machine and another person with a hot dog cart. The boys wouldn't need lunch today. It wasn't too hard to recognize Angela Hawkins. I knew right away as she walked directly toward me with a slow and determined stride. Everything about her exuded Italian heritage. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and broad hips. I suppose a gentleman wouldn't notice her hips, but they were emphasized by her height, barely 5 feet tall. Tony appeared imposing, and his sister had a sturdy build. I felt a bit uneasy as she approached, but my apprehension lessened when I noticed the smaller version of her by her side, a young girl of around 10 who closely resembled Angela, albeit with lighter hair and a less developed physique. It seemed we both found comfort in the presence of our children, a somewhat pathetic realization. As she came closer, she extended her hand in a friendly gesture, addressing me as Daniel Mercer. I shook her hand, feeling a sense of familiarity akin to a scene from a movie about Dr. Livingston. Despite her smile, she seemed slightly nervous, which helped ease my own discomfort. I chose to remain silent, prompting her to continue speaking. She expressed her intention for both of us to learn the business thoroughly enough to take control, emphasizing the need for me to assert myself in the meantime. Angela admitted that she was a nice person, which led Tony and his wife to attempt to take advantage of her. Her tone became more relaxed as she remarked on the unsuccessful outcome for Tony and his wife. I found her comment oddly amusing and chuckled. Over the next half hour, we discussed the terms of our arrangement. Angela offered better pay and benefits compared to my factory job, with the option to return if things didn't work out, although I hoped they would. Todd looked unwell on the way home, likely from too many hot dogs and sodas. Meanwhile, Terry seemed to enjoy himself, chatting with Carla more than inspecting cars. A positive sign. Todd got sick in the truck and skipped supper. I started work the following Monday. Things unfolded, as Angela predicted. I quickly familiarized myself with the operation and gained support from employees, particularly Glenn's cousin, my staunchest ally. Most wanted the business to thrive and readily reported any misconduct. Angela delegated firings to me, a task I surprisingly relished. I lived up to my reputation. Detective Green visited for coffee often, though our conversations remained light. Eventually, he shared a personal story. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Philly. I returned home one day to find my wife in bed with my supervisor. I attacked them and threw my wife out. The department gave me the ultimatum to quit or be fired. A week later, I found work here. Before leaving, I ensured my wife's lover lost his job. I didn't press for more details. At least now, I understood why he seemed to favor my side. The boys agreed not to inform their mother about my new job. During visits, they casually mentioned the lengthy drive, but understood it was unavoidable. I felt it was crucial for Marcy to see her sons, not for her sake, but to inflict emotional pain. I know it's a terrible way to involve your kids, but I derived some twisted pleasure from it. Angela and I were spending more time together at and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted on taking her and Carla to Nobles Grove. Mostly we stayed close to home due to our living situations complicating any romantic prospects. While I was keen on a closer relationship with Angela, it wasn't feasible. I still resided with my parents and the boys while Angela and Carla shared a small studio apartment. Since the business exceeded expectations, Angela discussed purchasing a house. She spent hours online searching for the perfect one. My first realization came when she mentioned wanting a 4-bedroom home for the boys. Danny, I think it's important for each boy to have their own room. It's better to address this now than later. Don't you agree? I recognized the question as a setup and sensed Angela viewed me as more than just an employee. The possibility of romance seemed promising. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. A split bedroom plan would also be beneficial. I don't like the idea of them being too close to the master bedroom, I added before leaving the office. Angela sported a small smile, marking our peculiar relationship. Though we never engaged in lovemaking or closeness acts, I felt closer to her than I did to Marcy in 12 years. 2 days after finalizing my divorce from Marcy, we all celebrated at Red Lobster. While the kids were unaware of the reason, Angela knew. Later at the apartment, while the kids watched a pay-per-view movie, Angela kissed me in the kitchen. We hugged and giggled until Carla caught us. "Whoops! Sorry, Mom," she said before adding, "It's about time." Angela and I behaved ourselves for the remainder of the evening, eagerly anticipating what lay ahead. The following day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I decided to take an extended lunch break and return to the apartment with a sense of pent-up energy. We didn't resume work until just before the end of the workday. As time went on, we continued to take numerous extended lunches, and Angela became increasingly serious about finding a new house. Detective Green would often drop by for casual visits, sometimes admiring the cars. He developed a liking for a Studebaker Hawk previously owned by Roger Ebert, and Angela offered him a good price for it. Unexpectedly, Angela requested that I take her to see Marcy. Despite our reduced number of trips, Marcy didn't seem to object. I asked if there was a specific reason for the visit, to which Angela replied, "Closure." Although I understood the term, the concept felt somewhat abstract to me. I offered to accompany her, but Angela insisted that I simply drive her there, stating that I didn't need to be present during the conversation. On a warm, sunny fall day, we arrived at Muncie. Since the inmate visits were held outside, I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela emerged into the exercise yard and sat at a table, chatting and smiling as if they were old friends. Things took an unexpected turn. After 5 minutes, Marcy's smile vanished, and she leaned across the picnic table, scowling at her visitor. Meanwhile, Angela remained cheerful. Suddenly, Marcy lunged across the table, attempting to grab Angela. The commotion was swiftly quelled by several guards who escorted my ex-wife back into the building, where she protested vehemently. Angela glanced at me, smiled, and shrugged before departing the visitors area. She was still grinning when she returned to the car. "What was that all about?" I questioned. "Your ex-wife is quite touchy," Angela remarked with a hint of amusement. After driving for several miles, she turned slightly, straining against the seatbelt. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine until she thought I was on her side. I admit I may have misled her a bit at first. "How so?" I inquired. I told her I came from Baltimore seeking revenge. That seemed to satisfy her because she thought I meant against you. "Absolutely. What I really meant was that I intended to seek retribution against Tony by assuming control of his business. I suppose you can still seek revenge against a deceased person, right?" "All right, but what caused her to become so upset?" "She wanted specifics, like when, where, and how." Naturally, I knew she was referring to you. Now I was becoming intrigued. I informed her that it would take a considerable amount of time and inquired if she wished to be kept updated on the progress. She eagerly consented and insisted on knowing precisely how I planned to accomplish it. When I divulged my strategy, she became furious. She completely lost her composure. It was quite remarkable. All right. How on earth do you plan to eliminate me?" "No, I genuinely want to know." Her smile widened. "I informed her that I intended to exhaust you to pass away." "That's all?" "Indeed. Isn't it amusing? I thought she might become angry, but I never anticipated her reaction to be so extreme." There was a brief moment of silence. We both sat there smiling. I felt immensely proud of her. "When do you intend to commence this endeavor?" "As soon as we arrive at the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Angela and I tied the knot. It was a carnal ceremony in the backyard of our new residence. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation along with a brief note enclosed. "Everything is proceeding as planned. You should be deceased in 40 or 50 years."
cheating wife is mad I abandoned her and disappeared without a word after I found out she was cheating with her coworker. I am sitting in my RV outside a cafe with free internet access typing this. I have gone over this so many times in my head, but I figured writing this out could help me clarify the thoughts in my head. I abandoned my family a little over a week after D-Day. Wife 36-year-old female and me 37-year-old male and daughter 13-year-old female. It's now almost 6 months since that day. I discovered her affair by chance. I was totally clueless. I believed we had a good marriage, plenty of intimacy. We would talk about stuff for hours. We had date night regularly. We had shared and individual hobbies. We were healthy and fairly good shape. It was good, or maybe it was just me thinking that. My wife, let's call her Eve. She cheated, so she obviously preferred another man, not me. And if she could betray me like that, she couldn't possibly love me. Here I was thinking she was my best friend. I guess not. In hindsight, I can see that I probably saw things through rose-tinted glasses. I actually believed that my family cared about me. I believed I was loved. I was the fool, I guess. I came home late from work. There was a safety training seminar I had to attend. She was sleeping on the sofa, and a message with some emojis popped up on her phone, emojis like I would use when I message her. I snooped and I found out what had been going on for at least 5 months. I knew the AP, let's call him Adam. He was a work colleague of hers. I had even been to a barbecue at his house and met his family. He was married and had 3 children, the youngest just 2 years old. While reading the messages, something just snapped in my head. It fundamentally changed me. Over the course of reading their messages, I went from loving Eve more than anything to hating her to just going blank. Not just about her, but everything. Totally numb, I took pictures of the messages and went to bed. I didn't sleep at all, I just stared at the ceiling. Eve was pissed the next day that I went to bed without waking her up. She complained about neck pain from sleeping on the couch all night. I wasn't really listening. I just remember thinking how everything was muffled, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world. I was kind of surprised about how little I cared. I felt practically nothing. I should be angry, right? During breakfast, I didn't say a single word. My wife and daughter chatted away. They didn't seem to notice anything different about me or even acknowledge me, but I definitely didn't feel like myself. I felt like I was someone new, someone I didn't know or understand, wearing a suit of the old me. I went through all the daily motions. I went to work, did all the normal stuff. The only difference is I sort of stopped talking. Sadly, I realized that nobody seemed to even notice. It's like I wasn't even there. I started to understand that Eve and my daughter didn't really love me. I was in the house with them, but unless they wanted something from me, they didn't really interact. They talked at me, not with me, if that makes sense. I would get these pangs of pain. They would come and go. Sometimes they would overwhelm me completely. I was not okay. I walked around like this for 5 days before Eve asked me if something was wrong during dinner. I had maybe uttered 3 words in total to her and my daughter in that period. I didn't even answer her question. I just made a "I'm okay, don't know" face, then continued eating. She seemed okay with that. The next day, I didn't go to work. I work for the local power company. I fix power lines and such. I packed up some random stuff, plus my camping hunting gear. I didn't really have a plan. I put it in my car and walked around the neighborhood for a while. I ended up at the kitchen table, waiting for the wife to come home. She came home with a few bags of groceries. She immediately started talking about her day while unpacking. I just sat at the kitchen table in pain. She didn't even look at me apart from one glance as she entered the kitchen. Daughter popped in and did the same. Their backs were turned to me, and they talked about some trivial crap on sale. I have never felt so rejected, unappreciated, so alone. I felt totally invisible, like I wasn't there, or that I wasn't worth acknowledging. I was thinking back on our lives, and all I could see was that they didn't care about me at all. They probably never did. I was an accessory to their life. I just didn't matter to them. I was a convenient and useful prop. I was hit with a wave of pain. I cried. Still they didn't notice, so I got angry, very angry. I had a glass of water in front of me. I stood up and threw it hard at the tiles over the sink. It just exploded. Glass shards rained over everything. They both turned around angry. What the? They froze. unsure what to do when they saw my contorted, tear-soaked face. It was uncomfortably quiet for a long while before I spoke. Eve, I know all about your cheating with Adam. I was surprised how clear it came out, since I was clenching my jaw so hard it hurt. My daughter looked at Eve. What? Is that true, Mom? Eve starting to try to explain. She briefly glanced at me and said, Sorry, I can explain. Then she turned back to our daughter, and they started arguing. Again, it was like I was invisible, or something. Hello, glass thrower here. After a few minutes watching their increasingly heated argument, I just walked out and got in my car. I looked at them again through the window, still arguing in the kitchen. They didn't even notice I had left. I sat there for a few more minutes before I gave up and just drove off. It took maybe 15 minutes before Eve tried to call me, then call after call after call, then a flood of texts from both of them. I just ignored it and eventually turned the phone off. The next day, I took half of our money out and called my boss. I told him I didn't know when I would be back. He told me if I didn't show up, I was fired. I just told him okay and hung up. I just didn't care. I went to Adam's house. His wife opened. I gave her a copy of the messages and told her what Adam and my wife had been up to. I left her crying on the stairs. At the end of the day, I ended up in a cheap hotel at the edge of town. The next few days were kind of a blur while I tried to come to terms with things. I didn't make any real progress, mostly staring at the wall, trying to think of reasons not to end myself. Eve's older brother is a cop. Let's call him Bob. Bob showed up on the third or fourth day, I'm not sure. I don't know how he found me. He tried to interrogate me. I didn't say anything. When I didn't engage, he told me I was under arrest and put me in cuffs. However, he didn't take me to the station like I expected. He took me home instead. Bob dragged me into the living room where my wife and daughter immediately started berating me. Still, I said nothing. I just listened in amazement while they told me how terrible this was for them. What a terrible a-hole I was for making them worry. It went on for a while. In the end, Eve screamed at me, "Say something." I stared at her for a while before calmly saying, "I have nothing to say to you." Bob freaked out and slammed me against the wall, screaming at me to not talk to his sister that way. I got a lot of satisfaction out of Bob's violent reaction. I don't know why it made me so happy. I was laughing. Bob's wife left him 4 months earlier. I smiled at Bob. "You're pathetic, Bob. Did you beat your wife too, Bob? Is that why she left you?" Bob hit me hard. I went down. Wife and daughter started screaming their heads off. As I start to get up, I just laughed even harder. I just couldn't help myself. I was bleeding from somewhere. I saw it on the floor. I am still in handcuffs, laughing. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. I spat blood in Bob's face and said, "Duck you, Bob." He hit me again, hard enough to knock me out cold this time. I woke in the hospital. I puked all over the floor the second I opened my eyes, so I knew I had a concussion. Eve, Bob, and my daughter was there. They were talking at me. I was so confused to make it out. A nurse appeared and asked them to leave. She got me a pan to puke in and called someone to clean. While she was taking my pulse, I told her that my family put me here and that they were not to come anywhere near me. That if they came back into the room, I would leave. I would just run away. She argued kind of sternly that running or even getting up was a really bad idea for me, but she would talk to security. I didn't see them again in the hospital. It was bliss. Finally, I felt a little at peace. I could think. I was thinking about maybe reporting Bob to get him fired, but it's a small town. His colleagues would probably cover for him. I considered confronting my wife, but that didn't make any sense to me either. I decided to disappear, to turn into a ghost. I wanted nothing to do with these people ever again. I made a letter to each of them. I warned Bob that if he ever bothered me again, I would report him. I told my daughter that Eve had betrayed me and that she would be without a father from now on. To Eve, I made a longer letter. I tried to be as practical as possible. I told her to sell the house, that I won't be paying the mortgage or utilities anymore, etc. I told her reconciliation or even contact was impossible, especially after she had sent her brother to drag me back and beat me senseless in front of them. I explained that I won't do anything for her ever again, so if she wants a divorce, she will have to arrange it. I told her I will disappear and I don't want to be found, that if she interferes with my life again, I will simply end myself, that we will never speak again. I ended it with how much she had hurt me. I really, really regret giving her that last sentence. It's like I let her steal a little bit more of me, like I let her give me a little more pain. In the hospital, I made a plan on how I could disappear. Eve gave the hospital some fresh clothes that they forwarded to me. Then one evening, I just went out the rear fire escape. I triggered some kind of alarm. I was panicking a bit, but thankfully no one stopped me. I got back to the hotel to pick up my car. I traded it with a small RV and set off. I got a new phone. The only person I called was my father. I told him everything and told him if he gave my new number to anyone, I would become totally unreachable forever. He could call me if he needed to reach me, if I needed to sign something. Other than that, I wanted to be left alone. For the first few months, I grieved the loss of my old life, but I came to realize that I grieved the loss of a fantasy, a memory that only existed in my head. The loving wife and daughter, the family, friends, it was all just an illusion in my head. These people never really cared for me. Over time, I started to rebuild a sort of life, only this time I was a total ghost. I ghosted all of society. Now I am only a P.O. box. I rent a safety deposit box to keep valuables and cash. I do odd jobs for money. I hunt and fish and scavenge. My money consumption is insignificant, so my cash reserves are actually growing. I don't pay taxes. I don't have a bank account. When people ask my name, I answer people call me Fred. It's not my name. I go out of my way to not contribute to society or anything else for that matter. I am still invisible like I was in my family. At least now I am invisible to strangers, not people that claim to love me. And to be honest, I kind of like it now. I brew my own beer. I move around. I have no obligations. I work when I want. I spend a lot of time in nature just relaxing. I have a few friends that I hunt and fish with. I am in amazing shape, the best shape of my life, actually. All in all, my life is getting better. At least now no one is using me for nothing but their own benefit while pretending they care about me. I don't know what happened to my wife and daughter, my old friends, or the rest of the family. I don't know if I am divorced now or if I owe child support. I don't know what happened to the house. I don't really care. My father has tried to give me information a few times, but I shut that down hard. He is the only one I speak to occasionally from my old life. I feel free, relaxed, content. I could say happy even. I don't have much, but I don't need much. When I get to the end of the line, I will sell everything and burn the rest of my money. I will make sure there is nothing of value left, nothing left to remember me by. Then I will walk into a national park without no one ever knowing and disappear forever. Sometimes I go to shopping malls, train or bus stations, and just observe the people. There I see them, all the men like I used to be. The men that are sacrificing themselves to a society and families that don't give a crap about them. Men that work themselves to death without any recognition or gratitude from anyone. They are guilt-tripped, pressured, and pushed to always make more, sacrifice more and more pointless nonsense. Brand clothes, bigger house, more this, more that. Never even getting a thank you, no form of gratitude or appreciation. In most cases, not even a smile. They try to fool themselves, just like I was, refusing to recognize reality. But I see it in them, just like I used to. Deep down, they know. I recognize their empty million-mile stare. I used to have the same one.
Christmas had always been a quiet, intimate occasion for my wife and me. We had a tradition of celebrating it alone, just the two of us. It was a chance to slow down, enjoy each other's company, and escape the noise of the world. For years, that simplicity was something I cherished. So, when my wife burst into the living room on my first day of vacation, shouting about an unexpected guest and a big surprise, I was caught completely off guard. I had barely begun to settle into my long-awaited break, savoring the thought of a peaceful holiday, and now she was already turning our plans upside down. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my coffee and looking up at her. Weren't we supposed to spend Christmas just the two of us? Oh, trust me, this is going to be special, she replied, practically glowing with excitement. Her enthusiasm was almost infectious, but I wasn't convinced. You'll see. It's important, and you're going to love it. Her excitement didn't sit well with me. I had been looking forward to a calm, uneventful day, the kind of Christmas we always had. The idea of some surprise guest felt like an intrusion on something sacred. Still, I decided to hear her out. Maybe there was more to it than she was letting on, though part of me doubted it. When the doorbell rang later that day, my curiosity turned to apprehension. I wasn't sure who or what to expect, but my hopes for a quiet Christmas dimmed the moment I opened the door. There stood her sister, of all people. Let me be clear, I've never been a fan of her sister. She's one of those people who seems to thrive on chaos. Her reputation for poor decision-making preceded her, and our past encounters had often ended in heated arguments. To make matters worse, she wasn't alone. She'd brought along some guy she introduced as her best friend, though he looked more like a tag-along she'd roped into her latest scheme. I pulled my wife aside, keeping my voice low. If your goal was to ruin Christmas, you've succeeded, I said, unable to mask my irritation. She rolled her eyes at me, brushing off my comment. Don't start. Just try to be nice. It's Christmas, for crying out loud. Reluctantly, I stayed quiet and let the evening unfold. It didn't take long for her sister to hijack the conversation. She and her so-called best friend wasted no time pitching some grand idea they'd apparently been cooking up. We want to throw an amazing Christmas party, her sister announced with theatrical enthusiasm. And we think your house is the perfect place for it. I stared at them, trying to process the sheer audacity of the request. Why here? I asked, keeping my tone steady. Why not your place? Oh, come on, she said, laughing as if I'd made a joke. You've got this big, beautiful house, and we're stuck in a tiny apartment. It'll be so much better here. Don't be a Grinch. I didn't appreciate being called a Grinch, but I held my tongue, glancing at my wife for support. To my dismay, her eyes were sparkling with excitement. I could tell she wasn't going to take my side on this. No, I said firmly, turning my attention back to her sister. We've always spent Christmas our way. I'm not about to turn my home into a party venue just because you think it's convenient. Her sister didn't take the rejection well. She muttered something under her breath about me being a killjoy, then added, well, think about it. You've got time. After they left, I sat down on the couch, hoping for a moment of peace. My wife joined me not long after, her expression a mix of understanding and determination. She sat close, placing her hand on my arm. I get where you're coming from, she said gently. But hear me out. I have an idea. We can make this work in a way that's fun for everyone, including us. How? I asked, skeptical of whatever she was about to suggest. I've got a plan, she said with a confidence that left little room for argument. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with a few people who can help with the organization. You don't have to lift a finger. Just relax and let me handle it. I wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I could see she was set on it. Her mind was made up, and no amount of arguing was going to change that. Fine, I said at last, leaning back into the couch. Let's see where this goes. The morning started on a strange note. My wife emerged from our bedroom in a dress that left very little to the imagination. It was the kind of outfit I'd expect for a fancy night out, not for organizing a Christmas party. What's this? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You're supposed to be meeting your sister to discuss planning, not walking into a fashion show. She laughed off my comment. Oh, don't be silly. My sister's taking me to a high-end restaurant. She has some well-connected friends who'll help us plan everything. They're professionals, and I want to make a good impression. It didn't sit right with me. Since when did organizing Christmas require this level of effort and this kind of outfit? But I held my tongue. Fine, I said. Let's see what comes out of this. After she left, I decided to make use of the day by visiting my best friend. If anyone could help me make sense of this bizarre situation, it was him. I explained everything over coffee, laying out the events of the past few days. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and gave me a concerned look. "You need to be careful," he said. "This all sounds off. Why is her sister so involved? And this thing about her friends being professionals? It's just weird." I nodded. He wasn't telling me anything I hadn't already thought myself. We spent the rest of the afternoon catching up, and as the evening rolled around, I realized my wife still hadn't come home. I checked my phone, no calls, no messages. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. By the time I left my friend's house, irritation had set in. Driving home, I rehearsed in my head how I'd confront her. When I walked through the door, though, my annoyance turned to confusion. There she was, sprawled out on the couch, clearly drunk and sound asleep. I sighed, leaning against the doorway. So much for her important meeting with professionals. This was going to be an interesting conversation in the morning. When she finally woke up, she didn't try to deny anything. "I know I shouldn't have gotten that drunk," she said, her voice groggy. "But don't get the wrong idea. I was just having some wine with my sister. Her boyfriend came to pick her up, and I ended up crashing here." "Fine," I said. "But what exactly did you accomplish? Did you figure out any details for this party?" "Actually, yes," she replied, perking up. "We've decided to rent a cottage. Or rather, my sister's friends will handle the rental. The idea is that we'll celebrate Christmas with family at home, then head to the cottage at night for a bigger party with friends. It'll be great, a mix of family time and social fun." Her enthusiasm was met with my skepticism. "And why do we need a cottage for this? Can't we just stick to one place?" "It's about creating the right vibe," she said. "Besides, this way we'll have a controlled environment where everyone can relax and meet new people. It'll be fun, trust me." The next day, I reluctantly agreed to accompany her to check out the cottage. The moment we arrived, two young men, clearly the friends her sister had mentioned, greeted us with self-satisfied grins. One of them wasted no time making an inappropriate comment about my wife's figure. I shot him a glare that made him step back, and he quickly changed the subject. The cottage itself wasn't bad. Spacious, well-kept, and secluded enough to feel private. While my wife admired the interior, I kept an eye on the young men. One of them couldn't stop staring at her, his gaze lingering far too long. When he noticed me watching, he immediately looked away, but the damage was done. My mood had soured even further. We eventually decided the cottage would work for the party, and my wife made arrangements to book it. As we were preparing to leave, one of the men approached her and asked for her phone number. "You know, just so we can coordinate the details directly," he said, flashing what he probably thought was a charming smile. To my surprise, she gave it to him. On the drive home, I couldn't keep quiet. "Why can't they go through your sister? Isn't she the one who brought them into this?" She sighed, clearly annoyed. "You're overcomplicating things. We still have a lot of work to do, and the last thing we need is unnecessary drama. Just trust me on this." With that, she left the conversation hanging, leaving me wondering what other surprises this Christmas had in store. The morning started abruptly with the sound of my wife's phone ringing. It was so loud it woke me up, and I groggily rolled over to see her already sitting up, answering the call. Her voice was cheerful, and she was laughing at something the person on the other end said. I grumbled something about the early hour and tried to doze off again, but her conversation dragged on. When I finally woke up fully about an hour later, I was surprised to hear that she was still on the phone. She was chuckling at something, her tone lively and animated. I cleared my throat loudly, making it clear that I was awake, and she quickly ended the call. "Who was that?" I asked as I sat up, still trying to shake off my grogginess. "Just the guys we met when we were looking at the cottage," she replied casually. They have some kind of problem, and I'm meeting them later to help sort it out. I frowned. A problem so serious you spent an hour laughing about it. She sighed, already sounding exasperated. Don't turn this into an argument. I'm an optimist. I believe in handling things with a light heart. Besides, we still have to figure out the program for the party. It has to be spectacular, and it's going to be a surprise. Only my sister, the guys, and I will know the details. I didn't like the sound of this, but I had other things to focus on. I had promised my dad I'd help him with his car restoration project today, so I grabbed my coffee and prepared to head out. We'll talk about this later, I said, leaving her to her plans. The day with my dad was a good distraction. We spent hours in the garage, working on his old car and talking about everything but the strange situation at home. By the time I got back, I was in a decent mood, but that changed quickly when I walked through the door and saw my wife. She was clearly tipsy, her cheeks flushed and her movements a bit unsteady. "What's going on here?" I asked, crossing my arms. She smiled at me, her voice slightly slurred. "I was just getting myself in the mood for an evening with you." Something about her demeanor didn't sit right with me. Deciding to brush it off, I headed to the bedroom to grab some condoms from the nightstand. To my surprise, the box wasn't there. I distinctly remembered seeing it just a few days ago. "Where are the condoms?" I called out, my voice firm. There was a pause before she answered, her tone noticeably nervous. "Oh, I threw them out. They'd gotten damaged, and I didn't want to risk it." "Don't worry, I bought new ones." "Check my bag." Her explanation didn't sit well with me, but I went to her bag as she suggested. Inside, I found a new box of condoms, but it was already open, and one was missing. I carried the box back to her, holding it up as I asked, "Why is one missing?" She hesitated, her face growing red. "My sister asked me for one," she finally said. "She needed it for something. I don't know. It's not a big deal." I stared at her, struggling to believe her story. "This all seems really strange," I said. She rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Here," she said, grabbing her phone. She pulled up a text conversation with her sister, showing me a message where her sister had indeed asked for a condom. While it eased my suspicion slightly, I still didn't like how the evening was unfolding. "You've managed to kill the mood entirely," she said, shaking her head. "And for what?" "Tomorrow, I might go to my grandmother's place with my sister. She needs help there, and I think it'll be good for me to get away for a couple of days." I frowned, trying to gauge whether this was another one of her half-baked plans. "Do you need me to come with you?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "No," she said quickly. "But I'll need you to handle a delicate matter with one of my sister's friends. It's about food and a few other things." "Can you do that?" While my wife was away at her grandmother's with her sister, I received a message from her sister. She had sent me the contact details for one of the guys who had been helping with the cottage arrangements. It seemed innocent enough, but given everything that had been going on, I wasn't entirely comfortable. Still, I decided to follow through and drove to the address she provided. When I arrived, the guy greeted me casually, and we got straight to business. We discussed food options, the types of drinks to stock, and other minor details for the party. It felt like standard planning, though his demeanor struck me as overly relaxed, almost smug. Toward the end of the conversation, he casually mentioned something that floored me. "By the way, we'll need to stock up on plenty of condoms too." I froze for a moment, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. Then, I asked him to elaborate. That's when he dropped the bombshell, explaining that the plan was for my wife's sister to host some sort of swingers party at the cottage once the main Christmas festivities had concluded. The audacity of the statement left me both stunned and furious. I told him firmly that this was absolutely not happening. I made it clear that I would never allow such a thing to take place. He seemed almost amused by my reaction, asking why I was so against it. My response was direct. This was a betrayal of trust and completely unacceptable, and no one had even hinted at this to me beforehand. It was beyond disrespectful. Leaving the conversation there, I immediately tried to call my wife. She didn't answer, which only deepened my suspicions. I began to wonder how much she knew about this supposed plan. Had she been keeping this from me? Or was she genuinely unaware? Either way, something didn't sit right. I told the guy to drop the ridiculous idea and left. The drive home was filled with frustration and a growing sense of distrust. By the time my wife returned later that evening, I was ready to confront her. Without wasting time, I asked her directly what she knew about the so-called special ending to the party. She looked at me, clearly confused, and claimed she had no idea what I was talking about. I explained the conversation I'd had with the guy, detailing everything he had said, including the mention of her sister's alleged plan. My wife's reaction seemed genuine. She looked shocked and insisted she had no knowledge of such a thing. To prove her innocence, she suggested we call her sister to clear things up. When we reached her sister, she immediately started laughing, claiming the whole thing was a joke. She said no one in their right mind would plan something so absurd for a Christmas party. Her tone was light, but something about her laughter felt off to me, almost forced. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was covering something up. After the call ended, I told my wife that from now on, I wanted to be involved in every aspect of the planning. I didn't trust her sister, and I wasn't about to let something like this happen under my nose. My wife, however, didn't take this well. She accused me of overreacting and making up scenarios in my head. She insisted that it was just a Christmas party and nothing more, and that I was being unnecessarily difficult. She went on to say that she was putting a lot of effort into making sure the party was perfect for everyone, and that my constant questioning was unhelpful. According to her, it was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime celebration, and she wanted to make it memorable. Her frustration was evident as she told me to stop undermining her work. By the end of the conversation, she had shut me down completely. She brushed off my concerns and said she was too tired to deal with my accusations. Without another word, she headed to bed, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. In the days that followed, I couldn't help but notice a shift in her behavior. She seemed more reserved, sharing fewer details about the party planning and keeping more to herself. Where she had once eagerly discussed every idea and decision with me, now she barely mentioned anything at all. It felt like she was deliberately keeping me at arm's length, and I couldn't ignore the growing sense that she was hiding something. After weeks of delays and back-and-forth planning, my wife finally sat me down to provide an update. She seemed unusually cheerful, almost relieved, as she announced that most of the work was done. The guest list was finalized, and apparently, there would be quite a crowd, friends of friends, and even a few acquaintances I'd never heard of. She assured me that the event was shaping up to be unforgettable. All that's left, she said, is securing a showman. We need someone who can really entertain everyone and make the night memorable. I raised an eyebrow at this. A showman? And where do we find someone like that? Don't worry, she said confidently. My sister's already on it. She knows someone personally and has everything nearly arranged. We just need to meet with him to finalize things. She handed me an address for a cafe and told me that's where they'd be meeting later that day. I had other errands to run, so I told her I might join them later. She seemed fine with that, her mood unusually bright. As she left, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of skepticism. Everything about this process had been shrouded in secrecy, and I was growing weary of the constant surprises. When I eventually made my way to the cafe, I spotted them immediately. The so-called showman was leaning across the table, showering my wife with compliments that were far too personal for my liking. She was smiling politely, but his demeanor was unmistakably flirtatious. Without hesitation, I walked over and sat down beside her, my presence cutting through the moment like a knife. "Everything okay here?" I asked, my tone calm but pointed. The showman's confidence visibly wavered as he straightened up, suddenly all business. My wife glanced at me, clearly annoyed at the interruption but quickly reassured me that they were just finishing up. She explained that their next meeting would involve planning specific activities and competitions for the party at the cottage. On the drive home, I couldn't hold back my frustration. Why does it seem like every guy we meet as part of this planning process has some kind of angle with you? I asked. She rolled her eyes. You're reading too much into things. Some people are just naturally friendly. Not everything is a flirtation, so don't start making issues where there aren't any. Her response didn't sit well with me, but I decided to let it go for the moment. As the days passed, she became increasingly preoccupied. She was out late more often, always with the excuse that there was still so much to finalize with the showman and other members of the planning team. Her absences began to feel excessive, but whenever I brought it up, she brushed off my concerns, insisting that everything was under control. One evening, she came home looking particularly pleased with herself. "You can congratulate me," she said with a triumphant grin. "We've sorted out almost everything. Now we just have to wait for the big day. It's going to be perfect." While she fell asleep that night, I couldn't shake my unease. Curiosity got the better of me, and I remembered seeing her jot down a password in a notebook earlier. Quietly, I retrieved her phone and unlocked it, telling myself it was just to put my mind at ease. What I found only deepened my suspicions. There was a group chat involving her sister, the sister's best friend, the showman, the guy handling the food, and a handful of others I didn't recognize. As I scrolled through the messages, everything seemed relatively standard: logistics, schedules, and some jokes. But then I came across a message from her sister that stood out: "Just make sure we're ready for the special event. It's going to be the highlight of the night." The group responded with laughing emojis and enthusiastic agreements, but no one elaborated on what this special event was supposed to be. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It could have been an innocent inside joke, but given everything else, I couldn't help but feel there was more to it. I locked her phone and put it back where I'd found it. Lying in bed, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things. After all, the planning seemed thorough, and perhaps this special event was just another part of their entertainment lineup. Still, the secrecy and vague messages left me uneasy. But this is just the beginning. The most shocking events are yet to come, and what unfolds next will leave everyone stunned. So far, everything that's happened has been minor compared to what's about to be revealed. These are just the breadcrumbs leading to a much larger, much darker truth. The day of Christmas finally arrived, and the celebrations began with a gathering of family members. My wife and I spent the afternoon with relatives, exchanging gifts, sharing stories, and enjoying a festive meal together. It was a warm and lively event, and for a while, I allowed myself to relax and enjoy the holiday spirit. But as the evening progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After the family gathering wound down, my wife pulled me aside. She explained that she and her sister needed to take care of a few last-minute details and insisted that I go ahead to the cottage with our friends. "You go ahead and get everyone settled," she said. "We'll finish up here and join you soon." Her tone was confident, but her words left me uneasy. Reluctantly, I agreed. I gathered our friends, and we all headed to the cottage. When we arrived, the place was beautifully set up. The tables were laid, decorations were in place, and the atmosphere was cheerful. Guests began to explore the space, complimenting the arrangements. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pride, thinking that all the chaos of planning might have been worth it. As the night wore on, the party hit its stride. Music played, people laughed and danced, and the energy in the room was electric. But as the hours passed, my anxiety grew. My wife and her sister still hadn't arrived, and I couldn't ignore the nagging worry in the back of my mind. Guests began to approach me, praising my wife's efforts in organizing such a wonderful event. Their compliments only heightened my unease. How could they applaud her when she wasn't even here? Unable to ignore my concerns any longer, I called her. When she answered, her voice was breathless, and I could hear noise in the background. "I'm still finishing up the final touches at home," she said, her words slightly slurred. Don't worry, I'll be there soon. Her tone did little to reassure me. She sounded drunk, and the chaos in the background was anything but comforting. Another hour passed, and she was still nowhere to be seen. My best friend, who had been watching my unease all night, finally pulled me aside. "This isn't right," he said. "We talked about how strange all this was. If you ask me, we should check on her. No one will notice if we're gone for a while." His words struck a chord. I tried calling her again, putting the phone on speaker. The moment she picked up, I was hit with the unmistakable sound of intimate voices in the background, laughter, gasps, and what could only be described as a disturbing mix of sounds. Her voice was slurred as she tried to explain, "It's just loud here, but I'm almost on my way." My heart sank as I realized she was lying. I nodded to my friend, and we quietly left the party, jumping into my car. The drive back to our house felt like an eternity. When we arrived, several cars were parked outside, and the sight immediately set me on edge. My worst fears were about to be confirmed. We entered the house and were met with a scene that made my blood run cold. My wife was in the middle of an unthinkable act, surrounded by 5 other people. I didn't take the time to process the details. Instead, I pulled out my phone and began recording. They didn't notice me at first, too caught up in their depravity. When I'd captured enough evidence, I reached for the pistol I kept in the drawer by the door and fired a single shot into the floor. The sound echoed through the house, freezing everyone in their tracks. My wife and her companions turned to face me, their expressions a mix of shock and terror. "What the hell do you think you're doing in my house?" I roared, my voice steady despite the fury coursing through me. My wife stammered, trying to approach me with her hands raised in a placating gesture. "It's not what it looks like," she began, her voice desperate. "You've got it all wrong." "Wrong?" I barked, leveling my gaze at her. "Get out. All of you. If you're not gone in the next 10 seconds, I swear I'll shoot every last one of you, and no one will question me because this is my house." The panic in the room was palpable. Her so-called friends scrambled to gather their things and bolted out of the door without looking back. Even her sister, who had been complicit in so much of the deception, fled without a word. My best friend, sensing the tension, muttered, "I think I should leave too. I hope she understands what she's brought upon herself." His parting words seemed to pierce through my wife's defensive facade. She crumbled, sinking to the floor in a fit of hysterical sobs. I looked down at her, my voice cold and unwavering. "Believe me," I said. "Whatever you think is coming, you have no idea what you're about to face." After the chaos of that night, I made my stance clear to my wife. I stood in front of her and said coldly, "Listen to me carefully, either you live by my rules in this marriage starting now, or we get divorced. There's no middle ground." She stared at me, her face pale and tear-streaked, unable to respond. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't going to let her off the hook so easily. I intended to give her hope, to let her believe there might still be a chance for reconciliation, all while I prepared my revenge. I wanted her to feel every bit of pain and humiliation that she had inflicted on me. Over the next few days, word of what had happened spread like wildfire. People at the party must have talked because soon my wife's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with angry messages. Her so-called friends were furious, accusing her of ruining everything, and even the people she thought were on her side turned their backs. I watched her shuffle around the house, constantly checking her phone, her face etched with guilt and misery. It didn't bring me joy to see her like this, but it didn't soften my resolve either. When the work week began, I took the next step. In complete secrecy, I called my lawyer and told him everything. I laid out the events of the party, the betrayal, and what I wanted to do next. He listened carefully, and after I finished, he assured me that we would start the divorce process immediately. I instructed him to proceed quietly, without notifying my wife until everything was in place. This was only the beginning of my plan. In the meantime, I turned my focus to our finances. My wife had no idea how much control I really had over our accounts, and I used that to my advantage. I began transferring every last penny into a separate, secure account that only I had access to. Bit by bit, I emptied out the shared accounts, leaving just enough to avoid raising suspicion. It took a few days, but by the time the paperwork was finalized, I had full control over everything we owned. When the divorce papers were finally ready, I decided to deliver them in a way she would never forget. I carefully packaged the documents, wrapping them in layers of festive paper and placing them inside a series of increasingly smaller boxes. I tied the final box with a bright ribbon, making it look like the perfect Christmas gift. I wanted her to experience that fleeting moment of hope and excitement before it all came crashing down. On Christmas morning, I approached her with the package in hand. "Let's forget about everything that's happened," I said with a smile that I knew looked genuine. "Here's my gift to you. Let's start fresh." Her face lit up with relief, and she eagerly took the box from me. "Of course," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'd love nothing more." I watched as she unwrapped the gift, box by box, the anticipation building on her face with each layer. Finally, she reached the last box, opened it, and pulled out the stack of divorce papers. Her expression froze in place as the reality of what she was holding sank in. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Those are divorce papers," I said calmly, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You destroyed my trust, my life, and my Christmas. I want you to feel what it's like to have your world ripped apart." She erupted into hysterics, screaming at me, calling me every name she could think of. "You're a monster," she shrieked. "Why did you keep me here just to do this to me?" "So you'd know exactly how it feels to have your life shattered by someone you trusted," I replied coldly. I didn't give her time to argue further. I grabbed a suitcase, filled it with her clothes, and threw it onto the front lawn. "Get out of my house," I said firmly. "I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here." She begged me to stop, to talk things through, but I ignored her. I pushed her out the door, watching as she stood in the cold, crying and shouting. I didn't care. This was her doing, and she would face the consequences. I locked the door behind her, shutting her out of my life for good. Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceedings began in earnest. My lawyer made sure everything was airtight. When she tried to claim that I had been abusive, even saying I had fired a gun at her, I was prepared. I had my best friend as a witness, and I reminded everyone that I had been in my own home. The claims were dismissed easily, and the court ruled in my favor on every front. By the time everything was over, my wife was left with nothing. I took full control of the house, the finances, and all our shared assets. With no money and nowhere to go, she ended up moving back in with her mother. She was forced to get a job for the first time in years, and I heard from mutual acquaintances that she struggled to adjust to her new reality. None of it mattered to me. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Meanwhile, I spent the following weekends with my family, enjoying the peace and stability I hadn't felt in a long time. I ignored her attempts to contact me, though my phone rang constantly with her name on the screen. She left voicemails, tearfully begging me to forgive her, to give her another chance, but I had no intention of doing so. Finally, one day, I answered just to end it once and for all. "It's over," I said flatly. "There's no going back. It's done." Her voice broke as she replied, "You'll regret this. Mark my words. You'll regret this." But I didn't. And I never would. You might think that this story ended when I divorced my ex-wife and cut her out of my life completely. For a while, it seemed like it was over. I hadn't heard anything about her for months, and I'd even moved on, remarrying a wonderful woman who brought peace and joy back into my life. But as it turns out, the story was far from over. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. One morning, I found a flat tire on my car. At first, I assumed I had simply driven over a nail or some debris. I replaced the tire without much thought, but the very next day, another tire went flat. That's when I took a closer look and noticed the precise cuts on all 4 tires. Someone had slashed them. I called my best friend to help, and we quickly resolved the issue, but the incident left me uneasy. Things escalated from there. My new wife's safety came into question when she began receiving strange messages on social media. At first, it seemed harmless enough. She told me that a woman had added her as a follower and sent a friendly message. The woman claimed to go to the same gym as my wife and wanted to connect. My wife, being kind and social, agreed and even suggested they meet for a workout. But the woman always had an excuse not to show up. Over the next 2 weeks, their conversations grew stranger. Out of nowhere, the woman sent my wife an old, intimate video of me, something that could have only come from my ex-wife. That's when it clicked. My ex had been holding a grudge all this time, and now she was trying to sabotage my new life. My wife was shocked, understandably, but once I pointed out the clues, she understood the situation. My wife decided we needed to take action. The first step was to block my ex-wife on all platforms. She did so without hesitation, but it was clear that this wouldn't be enough. My ex was relentless, and her anger seemed to intensify after being blocked. She escalated her attacks, targeting not just me but my wife directly. The turning point came when my ex decided to go after my wife's car. Late one night, she was caught by police attempting to set the car on fire. A patrol officer spotted her, a woman in a mask holding a blowtorch and pouring gasoline over the vehicle. The situation was so absurd it was almost comical, but it was no laughing matter. She was arrested on the spot, and we pressed charges. The court case was grueling. The prosecutor pushed for a 5-year prison sentence and a hefty fine, citing her repeated harassment and the dangerous nature of her actions. Her defense lawyer argued that it was a moment of emotional distress, a nervous breakdown brought on by lingering anger and frustration. In the end, she was given a conditional sentence and mandated therapy instead of jail time. This incident was the final straw for me. It wasn't just the tires, the messages, or the attempt to burn my wife's car. It was the culmination of constant interference and threats to our peace. I realized that as long as we stayed in that house, we'd never truly feel safe. My ex knew where we lived, and it was clear she wasn't letting go anytime soon. We made the decision to sell the house and move away. It wasn't an easy choice. That house had been a fresh start for me and my new wife, a place where we had built our life together. But no physical space was worth the stress and danger we were facing. After the sale, we relocated closer to my wife's family. Her parents lived in a quiet, welcoming town that felt like the perfect place to start over. With their support, we purchased a new home and began to rebuild our lives. The change of scenery brought a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in a long time. My ex-wife's harassment had taken a toll on us, but it hadn't broken us. If anything, it brought my wife and me closer together. We learned to trust and support each other in ways we hadn't before. Moving near her family also gave us a strong support system, which made the transition much smoother. The peace and quiet of our new home was a stark contrast to the chaos we'd left behind. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. We focused on building a life free from the shadow of my ex's bitterness. We spent more time with her family, exploring the local area, and planning for a future that was finally ours to shape.
Welcome back and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the study windows of the Knox family estate, where Remington Knox stood surrounded by 3 generations of family history. His fingers traced the spine of another leather-bound journal as he searched for the elusive tax documents he needed. The colonial house's weathered oak shelves held more than just books. They contained the legacy of the Knox men who had raised their families within these walls. Rem paused at his great-grandfather's section, noting how the leather bindings had darkened with age. As he pulled one volume forward, something shifted behind it, a manila envelope, wedged deep between the books. It was thick, obviously full of documents, and bore no markings on its exterior. That's odd, he muttered, carefully extracting it. The envelope wasn't sealed, and its contents slid out easily into his hands. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the first page, then widened in disbelief. Adoption papers. Multiple sets, professionally drafted and ready for signatures. Rem's heart skipped a beat. He and Evangeline had never discussed adoption, not once in their decade of marriage. Their twins, Aurora and Sebastian, were weeks away from their 8th birthday. The thought that she might want to expand their family should have brought joy, but something felt off about these papers. He moved to his grandfather's mahogany desk, spreading the documents across its polished surface. The formatting looked strange for adoption papers, too many clauses about custody and legal guardianship. Before he could read further, voices drifted up through the heating vent from the kitchen below. "I'm telling you, Mom, everything's under control." Evangeline's voice carried clearly through the old ductwork. "Rem will sign them without a second thought. He's so trusting, he won't even read past the first page." Rem froze, his hand hovering over the papers. A muffled response from his mother-in-law was followed by Evangeline's laugh, a sound that now seemed hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. "Of course Declan and I have thought this through. Once Rem signs, the kids will legally be with their real father. My darling brother-in-law has waited long enough, don't you think?" The words hit Rem like physical blows. His fingers clenched, crumpling the edge of the document he held. The implications of what he just heard threatened to overwhelm him, but years of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He forced his breathing to steady, his mind already shifting into analytical mode. Looking down at the papers with new understanding, he noticed details he'd missed in his initial shock. The careful wording about transfer of parental rights. The specific mentions of medical and educational decision-making authority. These weren't adoption papers, they were a trap, designed to strip him of his rights to his own children. And what about the foundation board meeting next month? His mother-in-law's voice became clearer as she moved closer to the vent. "Please, Mother. Once this is done, the Knox family trust will be secure. Declan has everything planned. Rem won't know what hit him until it's too late." The sound of a cabinet door closing downstairs snapped Rem out of his focused listening. He gathered the papers with mechanical precision, returned them exactly as he'd found them, and carefully shifted the journals back into place. Years of boardroom battles had taught him the value of appearing unchanged when you discovered your opponent's hand. He glanced at his reflection in the window. Not a hair out of place, not a sign of the earthquake that had just shaken his world. Good. He needed that control now more than ever. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Aurora's teacher about the upcoming school play. His children. His twins. A wave of cold fury washed over him, but he channeled it into clarity. They needed him thinking, not reacting. The study door opened, and Evangeline appeared, wearing the smile that had once made his heart race. Now he saw the calculation behind it. "Darling, did you find those tax documents?" She leaned against the doorframe, the picture of casual concern. "You've been up here for ages." Rem allowed himself a small frown of frustration. "Not yet. This filing system of Dad's is like a puzzle box. Why don't you take a break? The kids want to show you their new science project before dinner." "Good idea." He moved toward the door, noting how she stepped aside just enough to let him pass without touching her. Had she always done that? What are they working on now? "Something about family genetics," she said, following him down the hall. "They're fascinated by inherited traits." The irony might have broken him if he hadn't already shifted into battle mode. Instead, he merely nodded. "Sounds interesting. Lead the way." As they descended the stairs, Rem's mind was already mapping out his next moves. He'd learned long ago that in business, the person who struck first usually lost. Information was power, and he needed more of it. He watched Evangeline walk ahead of him, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She'd always moved like a queen in their home, but now he saw it differently, not regal, but entitled. She thought she was sacrificing a pawn in her game. She had no idea she'd just awakened a knight. After dinner, when Evangeline took the twins to their piano lessons, Rem returned to the study. The manila envelope remained exactly where he'd left it, but this time he bypassed it entirely. His target was the journal he'd been examining when he'd first made his discovery. His great-grandfather's handwriting filled the pages with tales of business dealings and family matters. But Rem wasn't interested in the distant past. He pulled out volume after volume until he reached the most recent ones, the journals his father had maintained until his death 5 years ago. The last journal felt different. Rem ran his fingers along its spine, finding a slight bulge near the binding. Careful examination revealed a letter tucked deep inside. The paper yellowed with age. His father's distinctive handwriting covered the page. "Son, there's something you need to know about Evangeline and Declan. I've been gathering evidence. If anything happens to me..." The rest was torn away, the paper jagged where it had been ripped mid-sentence. Rem stared at the fragment, memories of his father's death flooding back. The car accident had never made sense. His father had been an exceptionally careful driver, especially in rain. The investigation had been surprisingly brief. The case closed despite several unanswered questions. Mr. Knox? Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Declan is here to see you." Rem quickly secured the letter in his inner jacket pocket. "Thank you, Maria. I'll meet him in the living room." Declan Knox strode into the room like he owned it, which Rem now realized might have been the plan all along. His brother's tailored suit and confident smile had once seemed charming. Now they struck Rem as the costume of a con man. "Working late, brother?" Declan's tone was casual, but his eyes darted around the study. "Just organizing some old files." Rem gestured to the scattered papers on his desk. "What brings you by? Can't a man visit his favorite brother?" Declan dropped into a leather armchair. "Actually, I wanted to discuss the Foundation's new tech initiative. I've got some promising startups lined up." "I'm sure you do." Rem leaned back, studying the man he'd grown up with. Had there always been that predatory edge to his smile? "But it's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Why don't we discuss it at the office?" A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed Declan's face. "This is rather time-sensitive, Remington. These opportunities won't wait forever. Neither will my meeting." Rem stood, a clear dismissal. "We'll talk tomorrow." After showing Declan out, Rem returned to the study and locked the door. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Sterling Bishop." "Sterling, it's Rem Knox. Remember that favor you owe me from our Harvard days?" A chuckle came through the speaker. "The one where you kept me from getting expelled? Hard to forget. I need your help." Quietly. Rem's voice was low, even though he knew Evangeline was still out with the twins. "How much access does your position at the FBI give you to financial records?" "Enough to be dangerous." "What are we looking for?" "Everything you can find on my brother's tech startups. Shell companies, offshore accounts, anything suspicious." "And Sterling? Include my wife in that search." A pause. "Rem, are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." After hanging up, Rem sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he composed a carefully worded email to the twins' doctor, requesting their complete medical records, including all tests from birth. The response came faster than he expected. Dr. Carter's reply was brief, but the attachment made Rem's blood run cold. It was a DNA test from the twins' birth, one he'd never seen before, one that had been deliberately kept from him. A knock at the door made him close the laptop quickly. "Yes? Daddy?" Aurora's voice came through the wood. "Can you help me with my science homework?" Rem took a deep breath, forcing his features into a calm expression before opening the door. His daughter stood there, notebook in hand, her dark curls falling around her face just like his mother's had. "Of course, sweetheart." He lifted her onto his lap as he sat back at the desk, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "What are we studying?" As Aurora chatted about genetic traits and Punnett squares, Rem held her a little tighter than usual. Looking at her now, he could see pieces of himself in every feature: his mother's curls, his father's eye shape, the Knox family chin. "Daddy? Are you okay?" "You're squishing me." "Sorry, princess." He loosened his grip slightly. "Just thinking about how much you remind me of Grandma Cordelia. Mommy says I look more like Aunt Patricia." "Mommy's wrong about a lot of things," Rem muttered, then caught himself. "Now, about those Punnett squares." The next morning, Rem arrived at his office earlier than usual. He needed time to think, to plan, to begin gathering the threads that would unravel this conspiracy. The city spread out below his corner office, the same view he'd had for the past decade. But today, everything looked different. His assistant, Janet, knocked and entered with his usual coffee. "Mr. Knox? Mr. Bishop is on line 1. He says it's urgent." "Thank you, Janet. Hold all other calls." Rem waited until the door closed before picking up the phone. "What did you find?" Sterling's voice was grim. "You might want to sit down for this, Remington. Those shell companies your brother uses for his tech startups, they all trace back to accounts opened the month before your wedding. And Evangeline's signature is on every single one." Rem's grip tightened on the phone. "How many?" 7 companies, 3 offshore accounts. The paper trail is complicated, but it's there if you know where to look. Rem, there's more. The initial funding for these accounts came from a transfer the day after your father's funeral. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Rem's stomach turn. "Can you send me everything you've found?" "Already encrypted and on its way." "But Rem, be careful. This level of financial manipulation. These people aren't playing around." As if on cue, Rem's laptop chimed with a new email. Not Sterling's report. This was from Dr. Carter, responding to his request for the twins' complete medical records. The attached files included birth certificates he'd never seen before, listing an attending physician he didn't recognize. "Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood," he read aloud. "What was that?" Sterling asked. "The attending physician on my children's birth certificates. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. Does that name appear anywhere in your financial investigation?" The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. "Give me a minute. Well, one of those offshore accounts? Registered to A.T. Blackwood. Can you find out who this doctor is?" "Already on it." More typing. "Rem, there's no record of a Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood ever working at the hospital where your kids were born. But I'm finding something else. Hold on." Rem's office door opened, and Evangeline walked in, immaculate in a designer suit. "Darling, we need to talk about those papers I left in your study." "I'll call you back," Rem said into the phone, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. He looked up at his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. "What papers would those be, dear?" Evangeline's smile was practiced, perfect. "The adoption papers, silly. I know we haven't discussed it, but I really think expanding our family would be wonderful. The twins are at such a good age for a new sibling." Rem leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to appear thoughtful. "Interesting timing. I was just reviewing some old family documents myself." "Oh." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Yes. It's amazing what you can find in old journals. Letters. Birth certificates." He watched her face carefully. "Tell me, Evangeline, who is Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood?" The color drained from her face for just a moment before she recovered. "I don't recall the names of all the doctors from 8 years ago, darling." "Why do you ask?" "No reason." Rem smiled, the same smile he used when closing a hostile takeover. "About those papers, why don't you bring them to my office later? We can go through them together." "Actually, there's no rush." Evangeline backed toward the door. "We should discuss it at home, when we have more time." After she left, Rem picked up his phone again. "Sterling? Find everything you can on Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood." "And Sterling? Add my father's accident to your investigation." "I have a feeling it wasn't an accident at all." He turned to his computer, pulling up the files Sterling had sent. As he read through the evidence of years of manipulation and deceit, his resolve hardened. They had underestimated him, mistaking his trust for weakness. That was their first mistake. It would also be their last. The grandfather clock in the Knox mansion struck midnight as Rem sat in his study, reviewing Sterling's preliminary findings. The documents painted a disturbing pattern of financial manipulation, but pieces were still missing. His phone lit up with an incoming call. Cordelia Knox. His mother rarely called this late. "Mother?" "Son." Cordelia's voice trembled, unlike her usual composed manner. "I need to tell you something. It can't wait until morning." Rem switched on the recording function of his phone, a habit from years of business dealings that now served a darker purpose. "What's wrong?" "It's about Declan." She drew a shaky breath. He came to see me today. He was drunk, angry. He started talking about things that have been happening since your wedding day. But it goes back further than that, all the way to college. Rim's grip tightened on the phone. Tell me everything. I found letters in the attic last week while looking for your father's old files. Letters between Declan and Evangeline, dated before your engagement. They've been planning this for years, Remington. The marriage, the children. All of it. What do you mean, planning? Your father suspected something wasn't right. That's why he was investigating that night. The night of the accident. Cordelia's voice cracked. He called me just before he left, said he had proof of something involving Declan and the company finances. He never made it home. The implications settled like ice in Rim's veins. Did Declan say anything about that night? Not directly, but he made threats when I confronted him about the letters. Said accidents happen in families all the time. Said I should remember what happened to your father before asking too many questions. A pause. Rim, there's more. Check the twins' birth certificates. Look at the attending physician, Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Rim said. The name already burned into his memory. How did you? I've been doing some investigating of my own. Mother, I need those letters. They're gone. Declan took them. But I remember what they said, every word. They talked about the Knox Trust, about needing legitimate heirs, about how easy it would be to manipulate you because you'd never suspect your own brother. Rim's jaw clenched. What exactly did they want from the trust? Everything. The foundation, the company holdings, the family estate. But they needed a Knox heir to access it. That's why they chose you. Declan couldn't qualify on his own after that scandal in college. What scandal? The one your father hushed up. Declan was selling company secrets to competitors. Your father gave him a choice, resign from the company or face charges. That's when the plotting started. They needed you, your position, your children. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's here. I have to go. But Rim, be careful. They're desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things, Rim finished. Mother, stay somewhere else tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even Patricia. After hanging up, Rim sat in the darkness of his study, pieces falling into place. His father's death, the suspicious timing of his engagement, the way Evangeline had rushed their wedding. His phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. Found something big about Blackwood. Call SAP. Sterling's office at the FBI Forensic Accounting Division hummed with the sound of computers. Maps of financial transactions covered one wall, red strings connecting shell companies to offshore accounts. Rim stood before them, studying the complex web his brother had woven. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Sterling said, pulling up a file on his screen, licensed to practice medicine in 3 states until 1995, when his license was revoked for falsifying medical records. Want to guess his real name? Rim leaned closer to the monitor. Show me. Dr. Theodore Blake, Evangeline's father. He changed his name after the medical board investigation, started practicing under Blackwood. But here's where it gets interesting. Sterling pointed to a series of transactions. That offshore account funding Declan's startups? Registered to T. Blackwood. The same signature appears on both the medical license application and the bank documents. He's been helping them all along, Rem muttered. But why risk practicing medicine under a false name? Because they needed someone they could trust to falsify the birth records. Sterling pulled up another document. I had our forensics team analyze the twins' original birth certificates. The paper's authentic, but the information isn't. These were created using stolen hospital letterhead and credentials. Rim's phone buzzed. A text from Evangeline. Where are you? We need to discuss those papers. Ignore it, Sterling advised, noting Rim's expression. We're close to something big here. Look at this pattern of transfers from Blackwood's account to a series of holding companies. Each one corresponds to a major event in your life. Your engagement, wedding, the twins' birth. They were marking their progress, Rim realized. Each step of their plan. Exactly. And there's more. Remember that medical board investigation that cost him his license? It wasn't just about falsified records. He was performing unauthorized fertility treatments, manipulating genetic testing results. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Sterling's assistant entered with a stack of files. "The hospital employment records you requested, sir. And Mr. Knox, your brother's secretary, called. He's trying to reach you about an urgent foundation matter. Tell him I'm in meetings all day." Rem turned back to the records. "What else did you find about these fertility treatments?" Sterling spread the files across his desk. According to the medical board investigation, Blackwood was accused of tampering with paternity tests, falsifying birth records, even performing unauthorized procedures. He lost his license, but most of the records were sealed as part of a settlement. "Can you unseal them?" "Already working on it. But Rem, there's something else you should see." Sterling pulled up a security camera photo. "This was taken at your father's accident site 2 hours before the crash. Recognize anyone?" The grainy image showed two figures in the rain, one unmistakably Declan, the other a woman whose stance and build matched Evangeline's exactly. "They were there," Rem said quietly. "They killed him. We can't prove that yet. But combined with the financial evidence..." Sterling gestured at the wall of connections. "We're building a RICO case. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe even murder. But we need more time to make it airtight. Time is the one thing we don't have." Rem showed Sterling the adoption papers he'd photographed. "They're making their move now." Back in his office, Rem spread the evidence across his desk like pieces of a dark puzzle. The timeline was becoming clear. Evangeline and Declan's relationship predated his marriage, possibly starting during that college scandal his mother had mentioned. The startups, the falsified records, his own position at the company, all carefully orchestrated pieces of their long game. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Knox? Your wife is here to see you. Send her in." Rem quickly tucked the documents into his safe, leaving only innocent paperwork visible. Evangeline entered, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Darling, you've been avoiding me. We need to discuss those papers." "Which ones?" Rem kept his tone casual. "The adoption papers you left in the study, or the shell company documents you signed before our wedding?" She faltered for just a moment before recovering her smile. "I don't know what you're talking about. The adoption papers are exactly what they appear to be. I thought expanding our family would make you happy, like you made my father happy." The words were soft, but they hit their mark. Evangeline's smile flickered. "Your father's accident was tragic, but I don't see what that has to do with..." Interesting choice of words. "I don't recall mentioning an accident." Rem stood, moving around the desk. "Tell me, how long have you and Declan been planning this? Since college? Or did it start when my father caught him selling company secrets?" The mask cracked further. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? The shell companies, the false medical records, the convenient timing of my father's death. It all fits a pattern. The only thing I can't figure out is why you went through with the marriage at all. Why not just let Declan take over when father died?" Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You know about the trust. The Knox family trust, accessible only to blood relatives with legitimate heirs. That's why you needed me, isn't it? Declan was disqualified after his scandal, but a marriage to me, children with my name. You have no proof of anything." Her voice had lost its warmth, revealing the steel beneath. "And even if you did, who would believe you? The trustworthy brother versus the charming family man? Please." Rem smiled, the same smile he used before destroying a business rival. "You really think I've survived this long in corporate takeovers by being trustworthy? Every conversation we've had for the past week has been recorded. Every document you've touched has been copied. Even this conversation is being preserved for future use." For the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. "You wouldn't dare expose this. Think of the children." "My children," he corrected her. "Or should we discuss Dr. Blackwood's involvement in their birth records?" Evangeline's composure shattered completely. "If you think you can threaten me..." "Threaten you? No, dear wife. I'm going to destroy you. You, Declan, your father, everyone involved in this conspiracy. But not yet. For now, go home. Play with our children. Enjoy the mansion. Consider it a preview of everything you're about to lose." After she fled his office, Rem called Sterling. How soon can you have that RICO case ready? Give me 2 weeks. Make it 1. They're getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Rem looked out his office window at the city below. It's time to set the final trap. The Knox Foundation Gala was in 10 days. The perfect stage for his counterattack. Let them think they had him cornered. Let them play their hand. He'd learned from his father's mistake. The best way to catch a snake was to make it think it was winning, right until the moment the trap snapped shut. The Knox estate gleamed under the evening lights, its colonial architecture providing the perfect backdrop for the annual Foundation Gala. Over 300 of the city's most influential figures moved through the grand halls, their conversations a steady murmur beneath crystal chandeliers. In his study, Rem adjusted his bow tie, watching the security feeds on his laptop. Sterling's team had installed additional cameras that morning, ensuring every angle would be captured. Everything's in place, Sterling confirmed through the secure line. Teams are positioned around the perimeter. Evidence packets are ready for distribution. Are you sure you want to do it this way? A snake only shows its true nature when it thinks it's won. Rem closed the laptop. They've spent years building their performance. It's time for the final act. Downstairs, Evangeline held court in the main hall, resplendent in designer silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She played the perfect hostess, laughing at all the right moments, touching all the right arms. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice how her eyes kept darting to the study door, waiting for Rem to appear. Declan stood at the podium, rehearsing his keynote speech. The Golden Knox Foundation banner hung behind him, its motto etched in silver, "Legacy through honor." The irony wasn't lost on Rem. "Daddy!" Aurora's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway of his study, Sebastian beside her, both dressed for the gala. "Mom says you need to come down. Uncle Declan's about to start his speech." Rem knelt before his children, straightening Sebastian's tie. "I'll be there soon. Remember what we practiced?" The twins nodded solemnly. They'd taken the news about their mother better than expected, perhaps because they'd sensed something was wrong long before Rem had discovered the truth. Children often saw what adults missed. "Good." He hugged them both. "Now go find Grandma Cordelia. Stay with her until I call you up." As they left, Rem took one final look at his father's portrait on the wall. "Time to finish what you started, Dad." The main hall buzzed with anticipation as Rem descended the grand staircase. Board members, business associates, family friends, all gathered to celebrate the Knox legacy. None of them knew they were about to witness its greatest test. Evangeline intercepted him at the bottom of the stairs, her smile brittle. "Where have you been?" "Declan's about to announce the new tech initiative. The one we discussed." "The Shell Company initiative, you mean?" Rem kept his voice low, watching her face. "Or should we call it the trust fund acquisition plan?" Her smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened on his arm. "Don't make a scene, darling. Think of the children." "I always do." He removed her hand. "That's why I've spent the last month thinking about how to protect them from you." Before she could respond, Declan tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention." The crowd turned toward the podium. Declan cut an impressive figure, every inch the successful businessman. His confidence had always been his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. "The Knox Foundation stands for legacy," Declan began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "For 3 generations, we've built more than just wealth. We've built a dynasty. Today, I'm honored to announce our boldest initiative yet." Rem moved through the crowd, positioning himself near the stage. He could see Sterling's agents at their assigned positions, watches synchronized, evidence packets ready. "But before my brother shares his vision," Declan continued, "I'd like to say a few words about family, about trust, about the bonds that make us stronger than any individual ambition." Rem caught his mother's eye across the room. Cordelia stood with the twins, her face set in the same expression she'd worn at his father's funeral. She gave him a slight nod. "And now," Declan raised his glass, "I'd like to introduce the man who's been not just my brother, but my partner in preserving the Knox legacy, Remington Knox." The applause echoed off marble floors as Rem took the podium. Evangeline's smile faltered, as she noticed the screens behind him flickering to life. "Today we're discussing legacy," Rem began, his voice carrying the same authority that had destroyed countless boardroom opponents. "So let's talk about how my wife and brother stole mine." The silence that fell was absolute. 5 years ago, Rem continued, as images appeared on the screens behind him, my father died in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Tonight, we're going to talk about why it wasn't an accident at all. Security footage filled the screens, grainy but clear enough to show two figures in the rain, examining the brake lines of a car. Gasps rippled through the crowd as timestamps appeared, matching the night of the accident. But that's just the beginning. Rem clicked through financial records, bank statements, falsified documents. Let's discuss the shell companies opened the month before my wedding. The offshore accounts registered to a doctor who doesn't exist. The systematic theft of millions from this foundation. Declan stepped forward, his charm cranked to maximum. Brother, if you have concerns about the foundation's finances, we should discuss this privately. Like you discuss things privately with my wife? Rem's voice could have frozen hell. Or like you discuss things with my father before he died. More images appeared, letters, emails, bank transfers. The evidence unfurled like a poisonous flower, each petal more damning than the last. DNA tests. Click. Bank records. Click. My father's partial letter, now completed by documents found in my mother's attic. Evangeline started moving toward the exit, but Sterling's agents smoothly blocked her path. Dr. Theodore Blake, Rem announced, also known as Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, my wife's father. A man who lost his medical license for falsifying records, who then created a new identity to continue his fraud. The man who helped orchestrate this entire scheme. The screens showed medical board investigations, license revocations, evidence of continued practice under false credentials. A planned seduction. Click. An engineered marriage. Click. Falsified birth records. Click. All leading to one goal, the Knox Family Trust. Declan reached the podium, his mask finally cracking. These are baseless accusations. But you made one mistake. Rem cut him off. You thought the Knox Trust was about blood. It's not. It's about honor. New footage appeared on the screens. Declan and Evangeline, the night of the accident. Phone records. Bank transfers. The sabotaged brake lines. 5 years of investigation. Rem continued. Every conversation recorded. Every document preserved. Every move you made, documented and verified. The crowd had drawn back, creating an island around Evangeline and Declan. The perfect stage for their final performance. Federal agents emerged from the crowd, led by Sterling himself. Declan Knox, Evangeline Knox, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspicion of murder. The Foundation's board members huddled in a corner, already voting to freeze all assets pending investigation. Rem wasn't finished. But this isn't just about justice. He nodded to the tech team, and new images appeared. The twin school play from the previous week. Watch your children perform, he told Evangeline and Declan. It's the last time you'll see them. Evangeline's composure finally shattered. What are you talking about? The custody papers you plan to trick me into signing? Rem's smile was razor-sharp. I had my lawyers convert them to termination of parental rights, for both of you. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment. No judge in the country will grant you visitation. Those are my children. Evangeline lunged for the podium, her designer dress forgotten as security restrained her. No, Rem's voice cut like steel through her screams. They're mine. The DNA test you faked? I had it redone. Turns out your father's medical fraud extended to fertility treatments. The twins are mine, biologically and in every way that matters. The evidence continued to play behind him, years of conspiracy exposed in high-definition clarity. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Evangeline and Declan were led away in handcuffs, their masks finally, completely shattered. Hours later, after the last guest had left and the federal agents had finished collecting evidence, Rem stood in his study. The twins slept upstairs, safe under their grandmother's watch. The estate was quiet, cleansed of its poisonous secrets. He opened his safe, removing one final document, a letter found in the wreckage of his father's car, warning about the snakes in their garden. Justice, like truth, sometimes skipped a generation, but it never slept. Sterling appeared in the doorway. The RICO case is solid. They're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. The foundation board has already voted to remove them from all positions and freeze their assets. And Dr. Blake? Picked up at his beach house an hour ago. He's singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. Rem nodded, placing the letter back in the safe. Have your team sweep the house again. I want every trace of them gone before the twins wake up. Already done. Sterling hesitated. You know, most men would have handled this differently. More publicly, more emotionally. Most men never had to watch their father die for trying to expose the truth. Rem closed the safe. Most men never had to protect their children from their own mother's schemes. The mansion would need changes, new security, new staff, new protocols. But the Knox legacy would survive, stronger for having exposed its weakest links. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison neutralized by the very trust they'd tried to steal. Today, the Knox estate houses a reformed foundation dedicated to exposing medical fraud. The twins, now teenagers, thrive under their father's care, their mother and uncle serving lengthy sentences for crimes ranging from fraud to attempted murder. And in the study, behind the journals, Rem keeps one final paper, his father's warning letter, a reminder that justice, like the truth, may skip a generation but never sleeps. Epilogue. A decade later, the Knox estate stood prouder than ever against the autumn skyline, its colonial architecture restored to its former glory. 10 years had passed since the night of the gala, each one marking another step in cleansing the poison from the Knox legacy. Rem sat in his study, now brightened by large windows he'd installed after removing the old, shadowy corners where secrets once hid. The weathered oak shelves still lined the walls, but they no longer held deceptions, only history and hope. His laptop displayed the latest report from the prison monitoring system. Evangeline's 7th parole request had been denied. Her designer silks had long since been replaced by prison grays, her perfectly manicured world reduced to a 6x8 cell. The psychological evaluation noted her continued refusal to acknowledge her crimes, still insisting she'd been framed. Her attempts to contact the twins through various aliases had finally stopped 3 years ago, after Rem's lawyers threatened additional charges. Declan hadn't fared much better. His charm had worn thin in federal prison, especially after fellow inmates discovered his role in his father's death. Multiple transfers between facilities hadn't improved his situation. His last appeal had been rejected 6 months ago, the judges unanimously agreeing that the evidence of his crimes was overwhelming. Dr. Theodore Blake, the man who'd practiced as Thaddeus Blackwood, had died in prison 2 years into his sentence. His deathbed confession had revealed even more depths to the conspiracy, including details about other families he'd manipulated through falsified medical records. The Knox Foundation's Medical Fraud Investigation Unit had used his testimony to expose similar schemes across the country. Dad. Sebastian's voice pulled Rem from his thoughts. His son stood in the doorway, 18 now, and bearing a striking resemblance to his grandfather. The foundation board is waiting in the conference room. The twins had grown into remarkable young adults. Aurora was finishing her first year at Harvard Law, following in her father's footsteps with a focus on corporate fraud litigation. Sebastian, with his gift for numbers, had already started working part-time at the Foundation's forensic accounting department under Sterling's mentorship. Tell them I'll be right there. Rem closed the prison report. How's the new tracking system coming along? Sebastian grinned. We've identified 3 more suspicious medical practices using the algorithm. Sterling thinks we can have them shut down by month's end. The Knox Foundation had been transformed over the past decade. What was once a traditional family trust had become the country's leading force in exposing medical fraud and corporate conspiracy. The same detailed documentation that had brought down Evangeline and Declan now served as a training model for forensic investigators. Cordelia had passed away peacefully 2 years ago, but not before seeing her grandchildren flourish and the Knox name restored. Her final years had been spent helping other families affected by similar schemes, turning her pain into purpose. Sterling had retired from the FBI but stayed on as the Foundation's head of investigations. His RICO case against Evangeline and Declan had become required study at Quantico, showcasing how family fraud schemes could be uncovered and prosecuted. The old study vent, the one that had first revealed the conspiracy, had been preserved behind glass, a reminder that truth often came through unexpected channels. Beside it hung Rim's father's portrait, restored to its rightful place of honor. Maria, the housekeeper who had witnessed so much, still ran the estate with quiet efficiency. She'd been instrumental in helping the twins through the transition, providing stability when their world had been upended. Now she served as the estate's unofficial historian, preserving the lessons learned from those dark days. The manila envelope that had started it all, the fake adoption papers, was now part of the Foundation's fraud education program. Law enforcement agencies regularly requested copies for training purposes, learning how to spot similar schemes. Rim's marriage to Elizabeth, a federal prosecutor he'd met during the trials, had added new warmth to the estate. She'd approached the twins with patience and understanding, never trying to replace their mother but offering friendship that gradually blossomed into genuine family bonds. Their 3-year-old daughter, Hope, represented everything the Knox legacy truly stood for: honor, truth, and resilience. The investigation had rippled far beyond the Knox family. Several other prominent families had discovered similar conspiracies in their own ranks, leading to a nationwide crackdown on medical fraud and trust fund schemes. The Knox Foundation provided resources and support for these families, helping them recover both legally and emotionally. Patricia, Evangeline's sister, had eventually come forward with additional evidence about her sister's crimes. She now worked with the Foundation's Victim Support Program, helping other siblings cope with family betrayal. The twins' birth certificates, the real ones, hung in Rim's private office, alongside the DNA test results that had confirmed what he'd known in his heart. They were his children, in every way that mattered. The fertility clinic fraud had been an ironic twist, revealing that Dr. Blake's manipulation had inadvertently ensured the children were biologically Rim's despite the conspiracy. Janet, Rim's longtime assistant, had risen to become the Foundation's chief operating officer. Her quiet efficiency had helped rebuild the organization from the ground up, implementing safeguards to prevent future infiltration attempts. The annual Knox Foundation Gala still took place, but its focus had shifted. Instead of self-congratulatory speeches about legacy, it now honored whistleblowers and investigators who exposed medical fraud. The event had become a symbol of transformation, showing how tragedy could spark positive change. Aurora's research into her grandfather's death had led to the creation of a cold case unit within the Foundation. They specialized in reviewing suspicious accidents involving corporate whistleblowers, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to wait a generation for justice. In the estate's garden, where Evangeline had once hosted her manipulative tea parties, there now stood a memorial, not to the past's darkness, but to the light that exposed it. The plaque bore the words that had become the Foundation's new motto: "Truth endures, justice prevails." The Knox name, once nearly destroyed by treachery, had become synonymous with integrity and perseverance. Law firms sought Knox Foundation certification for their fraud investigations. Medical boards consulted them on licensing issues. Universities invited Rim to speak about corporate ethics and family governance. Behind the study's journals, in a specially designed safe, Rim still kept his father's warning letter. But it was no longer a reminder of betrayal. Instead, it represented the moment when truth began its long journey to the surface. The letter was now accompanied by a decade of thank you notes from families the Foundation had helped, each one a testament to the power of exposing deception. Evangeline and Declan's crimes had earned them more than just prison sentences. Their assets had been seized, their reputations destroyed, their social circles evaporated. Evangeline's prison counselor reported that she spent hours staring at old photos of the twins, finally experiencing the loss she'd planned to inflict on others. Declan had aged rapidly behind bars, his charm useless against the weight of his crimes. The old guard of the Knox Foundation Board had been replaced by experts in fraud detection and victim advocacy. Quarterly meetings now focused on prevention and education rather than mere profit. The trust that Evangeline and Declan had tried to steal had grown into something far more valuable, a force for accountability in a world of complex deceptions. As Rim walked to the conference room, He passed the wall of success stories, photographs, and letters from families the foundation had helped. Each one represented a conspiracy exposed, a truth uncovered, a legacy preserved. The twins had insisted on creating this display, understanding that their own story was part of a larger narrative of justice and recovery. The foundation's legal team, led by attorneys who had worked on the original case, had developed protocols for identifying similar schemes. These were now used by law enforcement agencies nationwide, creating a lasting impact far beyond the Knox family's personal tragedy. In the end, the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the Knox legacy had instead refined it, burning away weakness and leaving behind something stronger. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison transformed into medicine for others facing similar battles. Today, as Rem prepared to review new cases with the board, he caught his reflection in his father's old desk. The past decade had added silver to his hair and lines to his face, but his eyes held the same determination they'd shown on that revelatory night in the study. The truth had not only survived, it had thrived, growing into a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined. Justice, like truth, had not only awakened, it had built a home in the Knox estate, its foundations deeper and stronger than any deception could shake. The next generation of Knox leaders would grow up understanding that legacy wasn't about blood or money. It was about the courage to face truth and the strength to protect it. The manila envelope that had started it all was now sealed in museum-grade preservation, a reminder that the smallest discovery could spark the greatest changes. Future generations would learn that the Knox name stood not for wealth or power, but for the unwavering pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. And in the garden where snakes once hid, flowers bloomed year-round, their colors a testament to the beauty that could grow from even the darkest soil, when tended with honor, nurtured by truth, and protected by unwavering justice.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
My world shattered, I discovered shocking proof of my wife brazenly cheating on me in my own car. My name is Ron, and I've been happily married to Lily for 15 years. Our family is a huge source of happiness for me, and I can really feel how much my wife loves me. Our marriage has grown in a way that makes me very happy. We're parents to 2 fantastic daughters in their early teens. Both of us have steady jobs. I work at a security company, and Lily is a voice translator at a film studio. We're healthy and live in a beautiful house in a nice area of the city. Life is great, and I don't think it could be any better. After our younger daughter was born, Lily gained some weight. However, her beautiful blue eyes, which stand out more behind her glasses. She doesn't use contact lenses because they bother her eyes when she reads or does paperwork, make her even more attractive. I'm deeply in love with Lily, and I know she loves me just as much. We have 2 amazing daughters, a comfortable house, and we don't worry about money. Everything was perfect in my life. But then, something bad happened after 15 years of marriage that could change everything and ruin my once perfect and happy life. Lately, Lily began a routine of hanging out with her women colleagues at various bars every other Friday. They rotate among 3 or 4 places they like. She goes out these Fridays to chat and relax after work, as she often tells me. I'm okay with her going out by herself. I get home by 4:30 every day to look after our daughters. When she's out with her colleagues on those nights, I make dinner for the girls and help them with homework, which I really enjoy. She typically gets back by 8, and then we spend the whole weekend together doing fun family activities and eating out with our daughters on Saturday night. But in recent months, she's been getting home later, around 10, on these girls' nights, and I've noticed she's had a few drinks. I didn't bring it up because she's still the same affectionate wife she's always been. Every time she returns from those nights out, she has this special smile that makes me want to hug her. I understand that her time with friends is her way to unwind and forget about a tough work week. I convinced myself it was just harmless fun with her colleagues, even if she started coming home later than before. Then, a few weeks ago, on a Monday morning, I received an email from someone who signed it as a friend. I almost deleted the message without reading it, but I decided to give it a second thought. The email said they were at the Black Crow last Friday and saw Lily enjoying herself with a group, especially dancing with a man from her group. They attached a picture taken with their cell phone, asking me to examine it closely. This email had already planted doubts in my mind, and I feared what I might find out. Despite knowing Lily danced during these outings, the email mentioned male co-workers, something she never told me. I always thought it was only her female friends. Even though she could have been dancing with someone already at the Black Crow, not part of their group, a lump formed in my throat, and I started feeling uneasy about the whole situation. Despite my reservations, I opened the attachment. The moment the picture appeared, I noticed it wasn't perfectly centered, suggesting the photographer was cautious to avoid being seen. I observed my wife's co-workers, both male and female, sitting at a long table in the background. The picture was somewhat blurry, but I could still make out my wife on the right side of the dance floor. She wore her beige blouse with red flowers and green leaves along with matching brown slacks, the same outfit from her last girls' night out. So I deduced the picture was taken the previous Friday when she arrived home later than usual at 10:30, giving me a hug and her usual smile. In the photo, she was on the dance floor with a tall young man, embracing tightly with both arms around his neck. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I couldn't recall ever dancing like that with Lily or any other girl in public. The man's lower body pressed tightly against her, and it seemed she could feel his hardness rubbing against her. He had to be aroused, as it's impossible not to be in that situation. Strangely, Lily didn't seem bothered. On the contrary, she appeared happy, pushing herself against him as they locked eyes. My wife, the mother of my daughters, was in the arms of a stranger, behaving provocatively in public. I couldn't believe what I saw. She wouldn't dance with me like that in public. Why was she letting a stranger act this way? Or was he truly a stranger? Doubt firmly took hold in my mind and grew fast beyond my control. Various scenarios of my wife with other men played out, making me feel sick. I rushed to the bathroom where I threw up my breakfast. Lily, my wife, was acting inappropriately in public. Was she having an affair? How could she do this to me and our 2 daughters? Many questions flooded my mind. Who was that man? Did they work together? How long had this been happening? Why was she involved with him? Update: for the next 30 minutes, I stayed in my office bathroom trying to clear my thoughts. Gradually, new emotions started emerging: disappointment, sadness, and anger, followed by a strong desire for revenge. A range of intense emotions took over me, creating a whirlwind of reactions. I felt the urge to kick Lily, to hug her and ask her to stop, or even to consider divorcing her. Then, a moment later, I'd think of forgiving her and giving her another chance. As I sat on the toilet, I thought I was losing my mind. Eventually, I regained control, deciding to do nothing but wait and watch Lily before taking any action. Making emotionally influenced decisions without knowing the full truth wouldn't make sense. I needed to wait and not tell her about what I already knew. Simultaneously, I was determined to get to the bottom of it all. One way or another, I had to get solid proof of what was going on. Was she cheating on me, or was she just having exaggerated fun? However, I already knew she had lied by omitting the whole truth about her evenings out with the girls. Her movie studio was only a couple of blocks away from my workplace. Since I was often on the road for work, checking on Lily was easy. The next day at 11:30, I parked at the end of her workplace's parking lot, feeling relatively safe with tinted windows. I watched the exit door until 1, but she never came out. I repeated this for the rest of the week, and on Friday at 12:15, I saw Lily and 3 others, a woman and 2 men, get into a black BMW. Lily sat in front, next to the driver, and they drove away. Naturally, I followed them. They drove downtown, entered the parking lot of a fancy restaurant, and I observed them laughing as they went inside. Parked in front of the restaurant, I stayed in my car until they came out at 2. Lily walked next to the tall, light-haired man, the driver, the same man she had been dancing with in the photo I already had. She seemed very cheerful and excited, touching his arms as they talked. This, more than anything else, angered me. They drove back to her workplace and all went inside. So far, Lily hadn't done anything wrong except for not mentioning to me that she sometimes went out to eat with both male and female co-workers. More importantly, the 4 of them at lunch acted as if they were 2 couples, not friends or co-workers. And that bothered me the most. That Friday, Lily didn't go out with the girls after work and got home at 5:15, cheerful and smiling as usual. It took a lot of willpower to control myself and not bombard her with questions. However, I asked her once, while quietly sitting in front of the television after supper, if she had a good day at work, and then I inquired about her lunch. For a few seconds, I noticed she didn't know exactly what to say, but soon enough, she told me she ate the tuna sandwich she had prepared before leaving for work in the morning. Calling her a liar and maybe a cheater, I told myself. Lily was looking at me with those big blue eyes that I love so much as she told that blatant lie. Although my anger was building, I still felt an urge to reach out and hug her. Of course, being in love with someone does that. I knew I had to control myself or risk doing something I might regret afterward. Instead of asking her more questions, I decided to change the subject and talk about my day at work, trying to act as I usually did. That weekend, Lily probably didn't realize we were facing a significant issue. Later that night, we were close twice, and she behaved like the affectionate wife she always had been. On Saturday, we took our daughters to the zoo, had a great family time, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the events of the past week. I didn't bother checking on her at noon for the rest of the week because I intended to follow her on Friday evening after work. On that Friday, when my two daughters arrived home at 4:15, I was already there waiting for them. After ordering pizza, I explained that I had to go to the office and would be home later in the evening. They were old enough to take care of themselves, and it didn't bother me to leave them alone in the house as long as they locked the door. I knew they would be in their room by the time I returned. At exactly 5, I got into my car and drove to Lily's workplace. I observed her getting into her car, and as she left the parking lot, she turned away from our home, heading to a pub for her evening out with the girls. I had no trouble following her, as there was a convoy of 6 cars between my SUV and her Toyota, all driving in the same direction towards a pub, watering hole, or a dance hall, whatever you want to call it. 10 minutes later, I saw Lily's Toyota and the other 6 cars entering the parking lot next to a combination bar restaurant called the Glass Shoe. I stayed in my car, parked at the other end. When everyone was inside, I got out and walked around the place to learn more about where she was going. The pub was relatively distant from other buildings, surrounded by parking spaces. 2 sides bordered streets, and the other 2 were defined by a well-trimmed 5ft high cedar hedge, in front of which were parking spaces. I noticed the black BMW from the convoy, which Lily had gotten into for the restaurant the previous Friday. It was now parked separately in front of the cedar hedge, away from the other cars. I observed separate sets of doors, one for the restaurant and another for the bar. There were fire doors at the back for both, but those were for emergencies only. Another entrance on the other side, where most cars were parked, also led to the bar. However, Lily's group had entered through the door for the restaurant part of the building. I returned to my car and began changing into clothes I had brought for the occasion. I wore a baseball cap and a black windbreaker. Then I added a pair of glasses to my disguise. To change my facial features somewhat, I inserted a protective denture into my mouth, similar to those worn by boxers. I knew I would have a hard time talking and drinking with this, but I didn't care since it was not my intention to get into a discussion or get drunk. Looking in the rear-view mirror, I knew that no one would recognize me. I waited another hour in my car before entering the bar. The group, including my wife, was seated together near the dance floor, drinking and having fun. Seeing Lily sitting close to the same guy she had gone to eat with the previous Friday saddened and disappointed me. I suspected that something might be going on between them. I picked a table at the back, far from them, to quietly observe. The section where I sat was dimmer. There were a couple of lonely souls like me drowning their sorrows. I knew no one would pay attention to me there. Soon the music started, and people moved to the dance floor. I noticed Lily dancing with the guy who sat next to her. The other 3 guys at their table had weird smiles, watching them dance. It was clear Lily and that guy were a couple, catching everyone's attention. After a couple of hours, only Lily, another girl, and 2 men remained. The rest had left. Both couples were on the dance floor, and my wife had her arms around the guy. It was evident they were lovers. He had his hands on Lily's waist, and they barely moved on the dance floor, just standing and rubbing against each other. Then I saw him kiss her and say something in her ear. I watched her nod, and they left the building holding hands. I followed them. It was already quite dark outside. I saw them walk hand in hand to his car, parked in the last row of the parking lot near the cedar hedge. He knew they wouldn't be bothered there, with no other cars nearby and the hedge at the back. What were they planning? How far would Lily let it go? I needed to find out. Carefully, I walked to the other end of the parking lot and then toward the cedar hedge. Staying close to the 5ft high hedge, I walked toward their car, hiding behind parked cars. Soon, I stood by the back of his BMW. At first, I saw no one inside due to the darkness. As I moved closer, attempting to look inside, the deeply tinted windows revealed nothing, but I heard muffled voices. Feeling desperate, I debated whether to intervene or wait to catch Lily in the act. After a brief moment, the decision was no longer mine. When I noticed the car shaking rhythmically, the guy was fooling around with my wife. I couldn't contain my rage. I yanked the door open, flooding the car with light, revealing my wife, Lily, lying on her back with her lover on top of her, caught red-handed. Having removed my disguise, Lily's eyes met mine, her expression shifting from bliss to shock in seconds. She mumbled an apology, urging me not to act rashly. Then, with urgency, she declared it meant nothing and asked me to wait for her, claiming she was going home. Slamming the door shut, I walked away, heading straight to my car. By the time I left the parking lot, Lily was already halfway to me, shouting for me to wait. Update: Lily arrived home less than 5 minutes after I did, appearing disheveled with messy hair and crumpled clothes. Tearfully, she approached me. She expressed deep remorse, apologizing for hurting me and breaking our marriage vows. Lily claimed that had she known I was being betrayed, she could have engaged in similar indiscretions. Despite her pleas, I felt an unexpected surge of anger. Her apologies continued as she insisted that her actions meant nothing to her, professing love for me and emphasizing the importance of our family. Overwhelmed, she cried, hiding her face and eventually sitting on the couch due to shaky legs. Dismissing her apologies, I asserted that what she did to our marriage was unforgivable and demanded to know the identity of the other person and the duration of their affair. I felt a sense of relief as she moved to the couch, removing her from my immediate presence. The urge to physically react to her betrayal lingered. She revealed the man's identity, someone from her workplace, and pleaded for understanding, claiming the affair should never have occurred. Lily justified her actions by pointing to supposed deception during girls' nights over the past 2 years, but insisted it didn't diminish her love for me. Expressing my inability to live with the public nature of her affair, I highlighted the impact on our reputation among co-workers and at social events. Lily begged for forgiveness, vowing that the betrayal would not recur and emphasizing the importance of salvaging our marriage and family. While she continued to speak, I stood up, turning away from her. I decided to leave to give myself time to think. I confronted her about destroying our marriage through her initial infidelity. A sudden cry and loud moan caught my attention, prompting me to look back at Lily on the floor, crying in desperation. Despite the overwhelming urge to comfort her, the anger and sense of betrayal made it clear I couldn't trust myself to stay near her. I silently left the house, spending the night in a hotel room without sleep. The next morning, I called my secretary and informed her I wouldn't be going to work for the day. I stayed in my room until noon. After grabbing a quick bite at the hotel restaurant, I passed by my house on the way to the office. There was a green Toyota in the driveway, which I recognized as Francine's, Lily's sister. At least I thought my daughters had their aunt's company, along with that of my cheating wife, providing a bit of comfort. What I didn't know then was that Lily was in the hospital. After leaving the house the previous evening and explaining the situation to her sister on the phone, Lily had a breakdown. It was only once I reached my office that I got the news. Francine, Lily's sister, called me, and we had a lengthy conversation. She explained that Lily was emotionally distressed and crying constantly. Less than an hour after I left the house the previous evening, my eldest daughter called Francine, saying Lily was delirious and I was not home. Francine then talked to her sister and promptly called an ambulance when she realized Lily's condition. Francine let me know she was still at my house, taking care of my 2 daughters for a few days. She strongly suggested that I visit my wife at Santa Mary's hospital in town. After the call ended, I was beyond shocked. Had I been selfish the previous evening? Did I abandon my family when they needed me the most? Maybe. But one thing was clear. If I stayed in the house with her that evening, there was a chance, however small, that I might have become violent due to what she had done. Yes, she wrecked our marriage, but until yesterday, I didn't see myself as someone who avoided problems. Was that exactly what I had done? Lily and I faced a significant problem, undoubtedly. But was that reason enough for me to abandon my family when they needed me? I felt terrible sitting behind my desk. I started crying, questioning if there could have been another way, a better way, with forgiveness and maybe reconciliation, a slim possibility. Of course, this mess was Lily's doing. She was entirely responsible for giving another man what should have been mine alone. However, breaking my marriage would hurt my 2 daughters too much. There had to be another solution. That's when I thought of forgiveness, with retribution. Once I recovered from the shock of learning about Lily's hospitalization, I got in my car and drove to the hospital. I had no idea what I would say to her, but one thing was certain. I was going to face the situation and find out exactly what she had done. Now I find myself lying in a hospital bed. A thought crosses my mind, recalling something my mother used to say: cheaters always face consequences, one way or another. Ron and I tied the knot when I was 20, and we were genuinely happy. We had 2 amazing daughters, a lovely home, a great neighborhood, and financial stability. More importantly, I loved my husband, and I knew he loved me back. When my youngest daughter turned 6, I landed a job at a film studio near Ron's workplace. With the fall of the Iron Curtain and the gradual democratization of communism, there was a high demand for U.S. films in Ukraine. Being fluent in Ukrainian and having acting experience from university, I secured a position as a female voice translator for English films, translating them into the Ukrainian language. It was a fantastic job with good pay, and I excelled at it. After 5 years, a new voice translator named Victor Dino joined us. He was a tall, attractive man in his late 20s with dark blonde hair. Most girls at the studio had a crush on him, but he seemed oblivious to the attention. Vic, born in the U.S. with Ukrainian-speaking grandparents, was perfectly bilingual. We started working together often, and a deep friendship developed between us. That's when my troubles began. Without realizing it, I found myself thinking I was in love with him. Initially, he treated me like the other girls, discussing work matters, and we worked well together. Eventually, he started joining us on alternate Fridays, and our friendship grew into something deeper. We became more than just colleagues. We became good friends. I confided in him about my life, sharing things I had never told my husband, especially when Vic began joining us at the pubs. My first mistake was not telling Ron that our girls' night out was now mixed. I enjoyed Vic's company and didn't want to share his attention with my husband on those nights. Our friendship turned into something deeper, and we found ourselves dancing together frequently. I didn't realize how far things had gone until one evening, while dancing to a slow song, he kissed me passionately. It wasn't a friendly or family kiss. I was shocked. That's how it all started. The following Friday, he found an excuse to take me out of the pub, and we engaged in intimate moments in his car. From there, our passion escalated, and soon we were engaging in more explicit activities in the backseat of his car. Despite feeling guilty when I got home, I made sure to show Ron the love he deserved. However, I failed to realize that Ron, as my husband, deserved my complete love, and I shouldn't have given any of it to Vic. Working with Vic every day made it impossible to keep away from him. Gradually, even at work, we developed the habit of hugging and kissing when no one was around. From my perspective, this behavior with Vic didn't diminish my love for Ron. I still would have given my life for him, and I had no intention of hurting him with my affair with Vic. I was wrong. Making love with Vic wasn't better than making love with my husband. By the time Ron found out about my affair with Vic, we had been lovers for 4 months. While I didn't love Vic like I loved my husband, the physical aspect was fantastic. The freedom I felt with Vic, not having to restrain myself, made all the difference. When making love with my husband, I had to hold back to avoid him thinking less of me. With Vic, I had no such restrictions, since I didn't care what he thought about me. This was the main reason I did things with Vic that I had never done with my husband. I think Vic and I were really thoughtless and careless in how we behaved in front of our colleagues. Vic didn't care much since he wasn't married. But because of our public behavior, it was only a matter of time before my husband found out about me and Vic from a jealous coworker. We should have been more discreet. Even if Ron never found out about my affair, I now understand it would still have been terribly wrong. The evening Ron caught us was the worst moment of my life. He yelled at me to go to hell and take my lover with me. Just before he turned to leave the car, I knew my marriage was in deep trouble. I even stepped on Vic in my rush to leave his car and catch up with my husband, but I was too late. By the time I was halfway to his car, he was speeding away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the parking lot. Until then, I considered my love for Ron like a fire burning only for him, and I knew he felt the same about me. Then one day, when Vic entered my life and kissed me for the first time, it was like a spark from that fire ignited another fire burning for Vic. These emotions for Vic didn't take anything away from the love I felt for my husband. I convinced myself it was like when my youngest daughter was born. Loving her with all my heart didn't reduce the love I still had for my eldest daughter. It's incredible the things we tell ourselves to justify our basest urges. Children don't expect a parent to love only them, and we never vow to our children to forsake all others. Yes, the love of a parent for a child is far different from the love one should have for their spouse. But I made sure those thoughts never reached my consciousness while I played games with Vic. I know my husband doesn't see it the same way I did then, and I don't blame him. I understand that if the roles were reversed and he had another woman in his life, I would be devastated. Human thoughts and emotions are mysterious, and sometimes we shouldn't try to reason them. So now, I'm here in a hospital bed. Each time I wake from my dreamless rest, I start thinking about the events of the last few months. I cry and feel sorry for myself. Then the nurse injects me again with something, and I sleep once more. A wonderful sleep that allows me to forget everything. I wish I could never wake up again and find peace with myself. But each time, just before I pass out, I see a picture of Ron and me on our wedding day. Oh God, help me, my children, my husband. I can't leave them. I must fight the urge to hide on the other side. Life is a never-ending combat. My father once told me, if you stop fighting, then you had no right to be living in the first place. I am alive. Ron and my daughters are alive. And I will live also. After all, they are the loves of my life. Yes, I will, for my husband and my family. To me, Vic is just dirt now. He had absolutely no right to be in my life in the first place. If Ron allows me, I will be, once again and for the rest of my life, the faithful wife I used to be. When I wake up, how long in the future, I don't know. But I will come back into my family's world. Of that, I am certain. When I do, the first thing I hope to see is my husband standing there in front of me, so that I can start the difficult task of making it up to him. I don't know how many days I have to stay here in the hospital bed, but I beg everyone to pray for Ron and our daughters.